Here I am, the sexologist, and my partner would just roll over and not be interested. And then I'd roll over the other side and cry. One of my main questions I ask myself is, what is erotically possible? I started noticing these patterns show up. That's where the erotic blueprints came from. There are 5 types, and the first one's an energetic. Number 2 is the sensual. One of the orgasmic superpowers of the shapeshifter is,
whoa. This is, by the way, blowing my mind.
So please, everyone stop faking it. We want those orgasmic explosions. 5 minutes of oral sex every day for 90 days straight.
Both sides doing it?
Yeah, both sides doing it. I find the sensual and the kinky work really, really well together. Most people think that, oh, if I have the same type, that's gonna be the best. And it isn't necessarily the best.
It is Jaiya.
Jaiya.
Renowned sexologist.
Best-selling author, pioneer, helping folks in the bedroom and elsewhere.
Is that Madonna? I was like, yeah.
People really worry, am I broken? Am I weird? Are my genitals okay? We're all wired differently in the bedroom. There's nothing wrong with you. People would come up, wow, this just completely changed my life. Everything makes sense now. Sex is a tool for our own self-realization. We've only touched the tip of the iceberg as to what's possible erotically. The number one thing when it comes to these blueprints is,
what's the number one reason women are actually having such bad sex right now?
I think one of the biggest reasons is because we have a lack of comprehensive, actually accurate sex education. We've only touched the surface, like the tip of the iceberg, as to what's possible erotically, especially with our bodies. And then we have a whole layer of shame on top of it. So we can't talk about it. If I admit something's not right, that's not okay. Like, where do I even go for this education to empower myself erotically? I don't think sex is just something that happens in our brains, although, our B spot is very powerful. Our brain is very powerful in terms of visualization, in terms of fantasy. However, getting into your body and understanding what your body is actually turned on by is a big piece of it. And so that's where the erotic blueprints came from. So there are 5 types, and the first one's an energetic. And that's someone who's turned on by space, tease, anticipation, longing, yearning. And the superpower of the energetic is that they can have orgasms without even being touched. They can go into expanded states of consciousness. They can go into multidimensional sex. And we can sometimes get really far out with what happens within the energetic realm. I love the energetic. But the shadow side of the energetic is often, because they're so sensitive and attuned, that they can short circuit really easily. And so if you go too much, too quick, you collapse space too much for them, then they're going to dissociate, they're going to shut down, and then they think they're weird or wrong or something's broken in me, that they start to build up armor. Instead of really speaking up and saying, no, let's stop, let's pause, something just happened, wait a minute, they will override their bodies continually. And then that starts to create this every time I go to have sex now, I'm starting to just dissociate in order to take it. And so the shadows are like the brakes. And even though we may be doing all the turn on things, if you got the brake on the car, your car's not going to go anywhere. You're just going to rev the engine and not have any orgasmic explosions happening. So we want those orgasmic explosions. And so we want to take the foot off of the brake. And so looking at the shadow side is where we go, okay, where do we need to heal within our sexuality or work with those shadows, bring them to the light, bring them into consciousness, stop the patterns that are there so that we can actually now accelerate.
And so going down a little deeper on the energetic, so we're going to go through every single one of these, but going a little deeper on the energetic then, how do you start to identify that you are potentially an energetic?
There are a couple of different ways which we can identify an erotic blueprint. One is that we can see what's happening in the body and how the body is turned on. The other is from what our mind is saying. So we want to look at both things, not just one aspect of it. So I like to do a lot of different games to determine how you can see, how is my body responding? What's happening in my mind during this? And we can start to pay attention. And so really it is paying attention. And I think the energetic blueprint, however, is the one where it's we don't know much about it. And we don't expect somebody's turned on by not being touched in the bedroom, So that aspect of, okay, wait a minute, this is where my turn on is, and feeling it and noticing that, well, when somebody's actually farther away from me, I feel more. That starts to give you a clue that you could be an energetic. But when somebody's coming in too much, that you're not feeling as much turn on, or, doing all the sex tips and techniques, you're not feeling the turn on in those standard narrative sexual techniques, then that may be a clue. Oh, maybe I'm an energetic because I feel more in the anticipation before the kiss than the actual kiss.
Ooh, okay, so is that one of the signs?
Yes.
So it's the things that happen before the actual act itself.
Yes.
So how do you then start? I've got so many questions. So how do you advise that people do this if you're with a partner, or what if you're not with a partner? Like, I would assume that it'd be better to identify what type of blueprint you have before you get into a sexual relationship.
Yeah.
So how do you navigate those?
Absolutely. So I think sex is something that isn't just about having a partner. I mean, we get so tripped up in like, oh, sex is this thing I do with a partner. No, sex is something that you're doing with you. Sex is a relationship with your own aliveness, with your own life force, with life itself. And I really like to parse out eroticism, which is why I called it the erotic blueprints versus sex, because I think that eroticism is life. And it is this juice, it is this aliveness. The Tantrikas called it Shakti energy. And so when we have that vitality that's happening, it's shifting our biochemistry in our body even. You know, our sex hormones are our youth hormones. So it gives us this radiance to have that aliveness intact and that sexual energy flowing through our bodies.
So how do you identify with the energetic then? If you're single, how would you know? Because if you're not then becoming intimate with the person yet, how would you identify that?
One thing people can do, just everybody who's listening or watching, to hover your hand over your arm and notice, what do you feel? And to breathe.
We do it as we talk.
And just notice what happens with your breath. Can you feel the heat from your hand? Do you feel any electricity? What's happening? Are you tensing your jaw? You know, like what starts to happen as you're just doing this, hovering? And then you can even go to the little hairs on your arms with your fingertip. And do you get little like chills? Or do you notice any kind of energy activating your genitals as you're touching your body this way? That could be a tune in that you are an energetic. You can do all of these types of games in your body alone. You don't necessarily need a partner to do them. And they may change when you're with a partner. You know, you may then do it with a partner and you're like, oh, wait a minute, solo sex by myself, I'm really energetic. Or I think a lot of people self-pleasure in the sexual blueprint because that's what we're taught. You know, we're taught like, okay, when you're with yourself, you're going to use the vibrator, you're going to use a toy, you're going to use your hands. But we just did self-pleasure.
Yeah, we did, girl. Okay, so let's go now to the number 2 in your blueprint.
Number 2 is the sensual, and the sensual is someone who's turned on by all of their senses being ignited. So this is a very sensual space. We have these fluffy pillows, different textures here within the space, and that's the sight, the sound, the taste, the touch, the way a space looks. And even just talking about it, you know, when we start to think of sensual, we think of contouring touch on the body. We think of massage. We think of slow dancing, hot baths, the candles lit. You were telling me a story before we got on set about a time when you were doing all of the sensual kind of like setup. And so like that was very sensual. You lit the candles, you had the space all like in dim light. That is very quintessential sexual.
And then the end of the story is my husband came in and he's like, what the hell are all these candles? Put on the floodlights.
Right, which is another blueprint, which we'll get to. And very interesting because I have a similar story where I did something in the other blueprint and my partner's like, why are you doing that so obvious? Because he wanted the sensual setup.
Right.
And so what's fascinating to me about the blueprints is how we assume somebody is something and we go to do that thing to please them. And then we find out, oh, wait a minute, I was approaching it all wrong because of who they are as an erotic being. And then who I am, I was coming from what I think I was supposed to do to turn them on or seduce them. And this is my challenge with sex tips and techniques is, you know, and I used to be the sex tip queen. I used to write, I had the books on them. I'd written hundreds of them. I like knew all the sex tips and none of it was working for my partner because I was one blueprint. And so anyway, sensual.
I actually love that story, by the way. I just really want people to pause for a second and hear that. Is that you thought you figured out all the tips, you thought you knew everything, and here you were actually going home and not actually having sex with your partner.
Yep. But here I am, the sexologist with all the tips, texts, and techniques. I thought, great. And then I'd come to bed and I'd do the things, and my partner would just roll over and not be interested. And then I'd roll over the other side and cry because I'm like, I'm a sexologist. I'm supposed to have this all figured out. Like, if this is happening, then something's really wrong.
Yeah, and how many women feel that shame and they're not a sexologist, right? Where they feel like, oh my God, it says something broken in me. Why can't I turn my
partner not
on?
attracted to me anymore? Yep. That was definitely going on in my head. It would start to roll all these thoughts and I'd start to go down this really negative spiral. And then he was losing confidence as well of, oh gosh, like I'm not adequate enough for her. And he would approach sex by cuddling, very sensual blueprint. So he's there cuddling and I'm rolling my eyes because I'm not getting the message. Just total mismatch, mixed wires.
Yeah. Okay, so with the sensual, what's the shadow side of it?
The shadow side of the sensual is you get caught up in your head and it's really hard to feel what's happening in your body because you're like, oh, that pillow's crooked and oh, the breath isn't right. And oh, I wonder how things are down there. You're starting to think of also the laundry list of all the things you need to do. I forgot to call that person. And your brain is going into hypervigilance and your nervous system is in that hypervigilance. And so you're just not enjoying, you're not here, you're not present because you're thinking about all the other things that need to be fixed or that are calling your attention away from the present moment with your partner and the pleasure that's happening.
And so it's not allowing your senses to really guide you.
Exactly. Yeah, you move away from your senses, even though it's your superpower.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you start to then eliminate the shadow side of that?
One of the ways that I find is really interesting, it's actually in another one of the blueprints, is intense sensation. So if you can bring an intense sensation into your body or shut off a sense, like eyes is one of the big powerful ones. So use a blindfold. Have a really intense sensation that's happening on your body. It will bring you to the present moment. Just doing this, now my awareness now goes to what's happening in my body.
So your mind isn't then going to the laundry list.
Exactly.
Genius. I love it. Okay, so let's go to the next one.
The next one is sexual. And the sexual is someone what we think about turn on in our culture. So nudity, penetration, orgasm, intercourse. The limited definition of sex, however, that's in the sexual is the shadow. It's like, okay, sex equals, when it's successful, that there's been some kind of penetration, that we've done the thing until kabam, there's a climax. And then everything is right in the world. So a sexual needs to have sex to relax, whereas a sensual likes to relax first in order to have sex. So it's really interesting how those two dynamics can really play out in a relationship. And if you have those two inside of you, even, like noticing, oh, there's this part of me that really wants to relax, but there's this part of me that wants to get to it. If you have those two as dancing together within your blueprint map. The positive, though, however, of the sexual is that they can really bring the joy to sex, and they have arousal that usually goes from 0 to 60. It's like, okay, I'm ready. Like when the lights go, get the lights on. I don't need all the things. Get the lingerie off. Let's just do the thing. That is so sexual blueprint. And so my partner would come in, and he'd just come in and I'd be like, chop, chop, come on, let's have sex.
Because you're the sexual one.
I'm the sexual one. And he was more sensual in the dynamic we were playing in at that time, because we didn't have all this vocabulary at the time. Part of this just came out of my own, like, let me solve this problem of feeling like I'm really failing. I'm failing as a partner. I'm failing in motherhood even, because I wasn't alive and juicy. I'm failing in all these aspects. I'm failing in my career because I'm not in alignment with what I'm teaching. And so, I had to figure it out. And this is part of me figuring out was, well, wait a minute, something is really disconnecting, because I think all men are sexual. I think like, wait a minute, I'm offering you sex like every day. I would touch his genitals in the car. And he'd look at me like, woman, what are you doing? This is so annoying. You'd be so annoyed.
How did you feel about that type of rejection then?
It felt, it was really hard. It was really hard. It was like a very low point in life of feeling like I couldn't succeed, of feeling like I wasn't good enough. And I started to question the relationship. We had a new baby and I wanted to stay in the relationship because I loved him. I loved him immensely. But our sex life was not what I wanted it to be and not what he wanted it to be either. We just couldn't seem to find our way. And I really had one foot out the door. I started to think, okay, this is it. Like, I'm going to start unraveling this relationship, even though we love each other. And then I flipped something in my own brain. And the flip in my own brain was, I'm going to commit. I'm going to do the opposite. And I'm going to commit 100% to this relationship for a year. And I'm going to do everything humanly possible to turn this around within this year. And 10 minutes in, we were in bliss. And there was a moment where we were in Jamaica and we were out on a pier at the end of the dock on a bed in a restaurant where they were serving us. It was like this little home-owned restaurant, and they had this amazing pier with a bed on it. And so we're out there eating, and there's a lightning storm in the ocean, and just a beautiful romantic moment. And I said, have you noticed anything different? And he's like, yeah. And this was about 10 months into my experiment. I said, I have committed 100% all into this relationship and have been doing whatever it takes to make this work. And that's what turned it around. Was I think it only takes one person sometimes, to be willing to do what it takes, to learn the skills, to see what's necessary to turn your partner on and to build that.
Wow, and that shift of you going, I had one foot out the door to then just committing was such a pivotal moment. And I think many of us, especially when it comes from rejection, like it almost feels easier to step back than to keep going and then fear like being rejected again and again and again, because that can really erode your self-esteem.
Absolutely. And, if it's something that's super unhealthy, if we had been in a relationship where that felt like it was unhealthy to my psychology or unhealthy, then that would have been different. But I have a partner who's really loves me and is really willing to hear me and to hear how certain things hurt and for us to work together. And I think of a problem not as something between two people, but a problem that's outside. And so we together then are looking at this to see, well, what do we both need to do? What are the things that we need to grow in order to solve this?
And in that situation also, I can just envision, you're trying to like touch his genitals in the car, and because society, including myself, thinks that like, oh, all guys want sex and they just want a woman to jump their bones. And most women are like, but it's not his birthday, right? And so now he must be feeling, hang on, I've got this dream woman who just wants to keep touching me, but I'm not getting turned on. So he's probably in his own head thinking there's something wrong with him because other people can only, maybe coerce their wives, sadly, into maybe having sex with them like once a year. They feel like it's coercing. And here he is having a woman that's always coming on to him and he just can't get aroused by it.
Yeah, I think that in that there was a lack of confidence because there was also his business wasn't doing well at the time. Like and we had a new baby. Like there were so many things going on that were nicks to his confidence. And I think sometimes if you feel like you can't win, which we were both in this situation where we couldn't win, then it's hard. It's just really hard to feel like turn on when you're feeling like you're a failure.
And especially with the messaging that men have of like being the stud in the bedroom.
Right. I mean, I think that this is really a disservice that we've done to men in our world, which is that there's a projection that this is the way that they're supposed to be. And then they think that they're supposed to be that way. Otherwise, they're a failure in the world. And what we've seen in people taking our quiz, we ask people what their gender is when we take the quiz. And what we've seen is that cisgendered men are usually all of the blueprints. Sexual is still high in there, but like it's a mix of the blueprints, not just sexual.
Yeah.
And so we need to stop thinking that men are so simple in their sexuality or so simple in their psychology and really see them for who they are as erotic beings.
Yeah, dude, after reading your book, I actually felt badly for my husband because I was like, I would put on the sexy lingerie, right? And then it was like super freaking uncomfortable and you got to breathe tightly and it's the corset and the thing and the lace and everything. And it's like, I hate wearing this. And he would come in, he's like, yeah, just take it off. And so part of me was just like, what's wrong with me?
Right.
It's like, am I not turning you on? And so him having to I felt insecure. I was then vocalizing my insecureness. And then for him, he was like trying to say, well, no, I just find you stunning and exciting with no clothes on at all.
Exactly.
And now to your point, there was this like total mismatch that I was building my insecurity. I was also thinking when I said my poor husband, like, is there something wrong with him? Like he doesn't get excited because I'm wearing lace underwear. Like,
isn't he supposed to?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then with my partner, if I came naked, it was too obvious.
Oh, is that what
he wanted me? He likes me all covered in athletic gear.
Interesting. Athletic gear.
Athletic wear. Yeah.
And so how did you deal with that in that moment? Because you said that you're a sensual?
I am primarily sexual energetic.
Okay. So when you're like, okay, I'm nude, that's like really putting yourself out there, and now he wants you in athletic wear. How do you reconcile that? Because I understand the like do what it takes mentality, but at the same time, how do you get turned on if you're just serving your partner?
That's a really good question. So part of that is about expanding into other blueprint territory. I think our blueprints show us where we're limited, as like there's a full spectrum of sexuality here, and then, oh, I'm kind of stuck in these categories. So can I find turn on in these other types? And so the experiment began for both of us because he was 0% sexual on his blueprint. So when I'm coming naked and grabbing his crotch, he's like, what are you doing, right? I asked him to send me some videos of what turned him on, and he sent me like videos of people like romantically kissing. So like I know there's high sensual there, but I was only 5% sensual. So I'm zero in his primary one, which is kinky, which is the next one, and he's 0 sexual. I'm 5% sensual, which is his almost the same as kinky for him, and then he's 0% or 5% energetic. So I'm sexual energetic, he's kinky sensual, and we're completely flip-flopped.
Holy smokes.
So we had to learn how to bridge it. We had to learn how do I then get turned on when I'm wearing athletic wear and getting the ropes out, you know? And he's cuddling with me, right? And we did that. We've done that dance, and we found those ways to, even just energetically, he can dominate me energetically by teasing me. And because my sexual is next, and I'm like, okay, let's get to the thing now. I'm like turned on because we've had all this energy play. He won't give it to me because now we're in a power dynamic of playing. And so that feeds his kinky to be able to play with me that way energetically.
Oh my God, that's so cool. Okay, so let's talk about kinky.
So kinky is someone who's turned on by the taboo. And that's whatever is taboo for you. I really like to have a broad definition of kink. I think we have a lot of things in our culture that are naughty. And so there's a lot of people who have kink within their blueprint map because it's like, oh, I like that thing that I'm not supposed to be doing. And there's psychological aspects to the kinky, and then there are physical aspects to the kinky. So my partner, Ian, he is psychological in that he likes to be out of control. He can switch between both dominance and submission, but he really loves to like not have to be the one who's in control. So when I'm taking over that power and I'm taking over that dominance of him, like he can't speak or he has to do what I say, those kinds of things are a big turn on. So that helped my sexual. So we do this little game, again, the Venn diagram of, for the next 24 hours, you have to do whatever I say, whatever sexual favors that I want, you have to do them. And that completely turns him on because now I'm in the power dynamic and we're playing a psychological game, and it turns my sexual on because I can just be like, come over here and do the thing. Chop.
Yeah.
You know?
Can you actually break down, you said there's 3 elements to kinky. Can you repeat those?
So there's the psychological.
Okay. And that's the what? Like, I'm going to tell you what to do, when to do it, how to do it.
And you can't talk.
Okay.
Within consent, of course.
Right,
you know? So like those are the power dynamics. And then the next one is sensation-based, and that's somebody who loves for example, Ian loves the ropes. And so the feeling of constriction, the sensation of constriction feels really good in his body, and that's very pleasurable. So if I get the ropes out and then I boss him around, it's a winner every single time. And then the third is somebody who is a mix of both of them, and he's a mix. He's a mix of both of them. Okay. Yeah.
Going back to what's the shadow side of kinky?
The shadow side of the kinky is shame. Why am I turned on by this? Why do I like this? This is outside of the box. And that shame then can become like this thing that then makes that thing that you're so turned on by the only thing that you want. And that eventually can become a rut and become a grave. So you find this pathway of something naughty that turns you on, and then all of a sudden it becomes the only path to turn on.
And you actually said earlier, kinky is whatever you perceive as kinky. Explain that, because I think this is so powerful.
Yeah, so if it's taboo for you, then that becomes kinky. So like I had a couple who had never had sex out of missionary position in 40 years of being married. And then they had sex outside of missionary position. It was so naughty to them. And so that was so kinky. So it has a wide range because of it being based upon that. So if it feels like, oh, I shouldn't be having anal or something like that, then that is now kinky instead of sexual. But if it's like, no, I just like the penetration of that, then it's more sexual blueprint.
What up, homie? I got something free and new to share with you right now.
How often are you visited by that negative voice in your head telling you that you're not smart enough, that you're not good enough, experienced enough, not fill in the blank. One of the most powerful things you can learn to do in life is to turn that negative voice into your bestie. And I want to teach you how to do that and so much more in my 4 steps to becoming confident workshop. And guys, the most amazing thing is you can actually register for completely free for this workshop. So click the link on your screen and I'll see you on the inside. So it doesn't have to be like all the way to 50 Shades of Grey.
No, it does not have to be, but if that's what turns you on, great,
yeah.
you know.
But I actually heard you say, you know, like specifically religious people as well, like that becomes a thing because they've been taught that that can be bad.
Right.
And so they stay in this kind of cocoon, if you will.
Right. Anything that feels bad and wrong, when you start to step outside of that and break free of that taboo, it may shift then from being kinky into something else. But as long as it still feels like it's the taboo and you're doing something wrong, and I'm putting wrong in quotes because it's not wrong in most ways. You know, if it's consensual, if it's safer, you know, you're practicing the safer sex practices. If it's sane and consensual, then you've got, you know, the recipe for something that can be played with.
Yeah. And what do you see as, I typically think of kinkiness, or I had until I read your book, thought of kinkiness as being more of like a male thing. But in again, reading your book, I'm like, oh, I'm the kinky one in my relationship. But I think,
I love that.
But I think I always put it in a bucket of like, well, no, Lisa, you're the female, you shouldn't. So do you actually notice a difference or between men and women in the kinkiness bucket, or is it just the stereotype that has been given to us by society?
You know, I think this is always an interesting conversation for me, is like the stereotypes of, oh, I shouldn't be that way because of my gender, or I shouldn't be that way because of something in my life, the religion I grew up with, that there are these shoulds that we put on ourselves. And so what we've seen in the quiz, I talked about how men are kind of around the board. With women, it's mostly sensual and energetic. But this is the really interesting piece. I talked about the mind versus the body. The quiz that we have online is all the mind. But then when I start to get into women's bodies, I see more kinky come online than any of the other blueprints, which is fascinating to me, because there's something, and there's always a sound. I always know because there's always a sound that comes with it. And it's like, because they've never tried it, or because they've never gone down that road, they don't know that it's actually something that's turning them on. And then we get into actual practice, and then there's this sound that happens, and I'm like, there's the kinky blueprint. And so we often have a quick expansion into the kinky once it starts to be explored.
That's so cool. And how do you start to, I was going to say actually eliminate the taboo so that you can try the kinkiness. Actually, how do you do that?
Part of it is just looking, okay, where are the corners of shame? And then what would have me feel safe? I love doing dyads. They're a process that I use a lot in my practice. And so it's as simple as something you could do with a partner. You could do this with a friend. You don't have to have a romantic partner you're doing this with. But tell me something that feels shameful in sexuality. And you keep going back and forth with the same prompt over and over again. And what it does is it starts to empty the mind of the mind content so that you can get free of all of the mental chatter that's going on about something. And then after you reveal all of the things that you feel shameful about, then you can go into, tell me something that would have you feel safe to explore kink. And then get all of the list of things that would help you feel safe. And then look at that list afterwards and go, okay, these are the things I actually need to implement here. These 3 are the top ones that would have me feel really safe to explore kink now.
Yeah, because I was thinking, what's the difference between the idea of something versus the actual act of something? Because there's a lot, and I'm just revealing something about myself here, but there's a lot of like kinkiness. I'm like, oh, that would be exciting. But I was like, even him doing the work with someone I feel very safe with, like my husband, I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between a fantasy and your brain.
Right, yeah, that's what I'm getting at, yeah.
And actually doing it. So I remember I read the Anne Rice trilogy, which has a lot of really intense kinky stuff in it. The Sleeping Beauty trilogy. Have you ever read it?
No. I'm putting that on my book list though.
So I read it and it was so hot, like in my brain, like so hot, and just, okay, maybe I want to try that. Maybe. And I was reading it for research for another book that I had written. And my partner and I were doing this experiment of 40 days of kink, where he was dominating me for 40 days and I was dominating him for 40 days. And during the time I was marking, you know, and reading this book, like things I wanted to try. And then when we flipped over into him dominating me, 8 days in, it was not going well for me. And my trauma was getting all triggered. And it didn't feel like I thought it would feel. It was so much better in my head than in real life. And so then we had to back up and we had to start over and go, well, wait a minute, let me find out authentically what my body loves versus what I had so much cognitive dissonance between the two. So sometimes something is better in your head than it is when you actually go to do it because your body has a different idea. Superpower, though, is that it can go, I mean, creatively. You could learn something every other day in the realm of kink. There's so many, just even like the knots and the rope ties or just any of those things, the psychological games that there are to play can be a lifetime of learning skill.
Amazing. Okay, and then the next blueprint?
So that's the shapeshifter. And the shapeshifter is someone who's turned on by all of this. So there's someone who likes all the variety, all the things, want it all the time, they could be in pleasure for a really long amount of time usually. One of the things at our events is we have all the massage tables set up and we have a day that's the shapeshifter day. And it's amazing to see. I mean, we can do 3 hours on the table and they're still not like, they're just like, we can go more, we can do more, we can do more. And Shapeshifter Day is always a little bit wild because there's this huge variety and a huge appetite for everything that they want, crave, and desire, and they always can have more of it.
So are they harder to please?
I wouldn't necessarily say they're harder to please. I would say that there's the most starving in the blueprints. And the reason why they're the most starving is because they shapeshift. This is part of their shadow and part of their superpower. They shapeshift to please the other people because they can speak any language. So if everybody's speaking sensual, okay, I'll speak sensual too. And so they can be pleased. It's just that they often don't have players who know how to play and speak all the different languages.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, how do they actually get true satisfaction in a long-term relationship if they're with one person that doesn't even have a combination? Let's say one person is just the sensual.
Yeah. So if they have a partner who's primarily one blueprint, like a big percentage of one blueprint, that can be a challenge, you know? And so that person has to be willing. And I think this is something I talk about a lot in the book because it's really the number one thing when it comes to these blueprints is, are you willing to learn? Are you willing to become multilingual so that you're satisfying your partner? If you love your partner and you're in a relationship that you want to stay in, then it's worth, let me go learn French. It's just like learning language. You can learn the skill sets. And so that's what it really comes down to is, do you have high willingness to take the time to learn how to play the Stradivarius violin, which is what the shapeshifter is, you know. Shadow side is that they can shapeshift to please everyone else, but also that they feel like they're too much or they're too complex. And so they've heard this in their life oftentimes, like, you just want too much, like, you're wearing me out. So it's not that you're too much or too complex, it's just that you're very erotically sophisticated and erotically intelligent. You actually have full spectrum sexuality. And so what I think is very interesting in my 30 years of practice is seeing, I think that we're all shapeshifters. And what has happened is that we're conditioned and programmed to be one type, where we then land and kind of get stuck and don't develop erotically past that one type to really come into full spectrum sexuality of who we are as erotic beings.
So is it kind of like the language where it's like, you've been brought up to speak this
exactly
language. You may have an accent if you speak other languages, but you can still speak other languages.
Right. Yeah. And so how willing are you to develop yourself? If we're looking at erotic empowerment for everyone and erotic confidence, being a shapeshifter that's fully developed is, to me, when we're whole. I always am careful to say this because I think that we're whole already. We actually are already whole and complete. We just need to uncover the programming and the conditioning that's on top of who we already are to step into our fullness erotically. And so it's about peeling back those layers that keep you from your full erotic expression of who you are. And to me, the shapeshifter is the full erotic expression where, of course, you have confidence. You can speak any language. You've just learned, you have 5 of them, you know, you can touch on. And there's not a boring moment because the shapeshifter has all this variety. It has access to the full capacity of our eroticism.
So when you said they can just keep going, does that mean that they can have typically have multiple orgasms?
Yeah, orgasmic superpowers are different in all of the blueprints, but one of the orgasmic superpowers of the shapeshifter is that they can have all the different kinds of orgasms, and they have really an unlimited. In my life, one of my missions, main questions I ask myself is, what is erotically possible? And I've never found the ceiling to that question. And I have been in that inquiry for 30 years and I have not found a ceiling.
Wow.
So what is possible is infinite.
Depending on yourself or depending on the person you're with, or both?
Both. Yeah.
Is there a way to then get certain satisfactions then, or do you advise if your partner cannot maybe reach the blueprint that you're in, would it serve you to serve yourself in that category and then please the other person?
Yes, this is when now that you know the blueprints and you start to know who you are erotically, it's like, okay, what are the next steps then? I know myself. That's the first one. And now let's look at, how am I being fed? Am I completely starving? Because if you're starving, trying to then go and please somebody else doesn't work. And I even looking at the history with my partner Ian and I, it's this, I was really starving. So then it was hard for me to go into like all the sensual and kinky and ropes. I was like, but I'm starving. So we did it.
You just want a cracker.
I do. Just
Forget about the gourmet meal. Just give me a cracker.
Exactly. And so we did this experiment. We do these experiments all the time. And we did 90 days of oral sex. And he had a lot of resistance going in. Again,
Both sides doing it?
yeah, both sides doing
Yeah.
it. And so we did this every day. We were going to do 5 minutes of oral sex every day for 90 days straight. But he was like, oh my gosh, he didn't want to fail. And so we had to come up with easy wins. I think this is an important thing for a lot of people to hear, is like, don't start like with the hardest thing. Start with something that's really, really easy. And so how can you get fed on easy wins? And oral sex seemed easy to me. And we didn't fully have the blueprints yet. So I was like, what is wrong with this man that he doesn't want oral sex for 90 days? You know? So we had to make it winnable for him. And so one of the winnable actions was it's only 5 minutes and it can be a mouth on any body part.
Ah.
So, that incorporated his sensual. It could be anywhere on the body. It doesn't have to be the genitals. And so that made it easy.
So he can like nibble your ear.
He could nibble my ear for 5 minutes. That would count as oral. And it works for me as an energetic, because sex can be not just genital focused, even though my sexual does come online. And what was interesting too about the 5 minutes is then we would find ourselves going 30 minutes, 45 minutes, like it would just be that in. It was like, okay, we got that 5 minute in, we won, we'd high five each other, and then we'd keep going. And then the next one was he got 10 we both got 10 like get out of oral sex free cards. And so we had we just really set it up to be really easy. And then I was fed. Now my sexual was fed, which then opened the door for our next experiment, which was the kinky experiment, which really fed him. So now we're coming from this deeply fed space. So the next one, so fed is the first one, then the next one is speaking. And so how are you speaking to your partner that helps them now feel connected to and honored? So if you're speaking the wrong language, we don't necessarily understand each other all the time. And the language isn't just the words we're saying. The language is also what's happening in your body. So if I'm coming to him and I'm saying, I want to fuck tonight, he's going to not be turned on. But if I say, let's cuddle and see what happens, then he's turned on because he doesn't feel pressure. Because I want to have sex is going to be pressure.
And how do you identify that? Is it just through identifying the blueprint? Okay.
Yeah, once you know the blueprint, then you can start to know, okay, well, even my vocal tone, if my vocal tone was too intense, then that's going to be a turn off, versus like if I'm like more melty and, have a different tone and way of being with him. And even energetic, body language is so important, that attunement for an energetic, because if I'm too close and there's any feeling of like too much aggression, and I even leave pauses in between my words so that the energetic can digest it. And so I took some of the things that I learned from some of my vocal training and from my acting background to go, okay, well, if somebody needs these things, then how I'm perceived and how they're reading things, I need to shift how I'm doing that. So even where my breath is, or how I'm looking in the eye or not looking in the eye, all of these things are being read. And so study of body language as well. I read this book, it was by Ken Dykewald, which is Body Mind, was the name of it. And I read this in college, and it fascinated me because he would look at people just standing in front of the room and how they were acting, and he could tell them their whole history just by their body language. And that was something that I just started studying, is okay, how I'm holding myself then is how people are interpreting who I am and what their projection is on me. And I started just breaking that down for the blueprints.
And I think one really important thing that you're saying is like, you have to kind of keep trying things, keep looking at things like the way that it works, right? Like, so with this tone, did that tone work?
Yeah.
Okay, did this word work?
And to not put it on as like something fake. At first, it's going to feel a little weird.
That's what I was going to say, because if you're sensual, telling someone, hey, you want to fuck, is a little uncomfortable and fake because you don't necessarily mean it.
Right. If you have trouble with those words, then how do we land into them and how do we make that comfortable? And sometimes that's just practice, like practice in front of a mirror. Just start saying, hey, and you're sensual and you're trying to talk to your sexual partner of like, hey, I'd like to fuck you tonight, and just practice it. Do it, get grounded, and then notice, well, wait a minute, now maybe I need to work with a shadow side because those words are hard. And is that a hard limit or is that just a resistance in me? And I think that's a really important key piece is something in me like a hard limit? I don't want to do this. Then we need to go, wait a minute, let me ask you a different question, partner. Can I ask you the question of what about that act? Like, let's just use anal as an example. So what about that act turns you on? What about that is the turn on? And let's say you have a hard limit about that. Now they can say, well, what really turns me on about that is that I feel like I'm in a surrendered position. I feel like I can let go more fully with that kind of sex. Okay, so now I've heard two things, surrender and let go. So how can I now bring surrender and let go that has nothing to do about the act that's actually happening and become a yes to surrender and let go versus the actual tactic?
And so how do you... then no, because you were saying, right, it's like there's one part that can be potentially the conditioning that we've been taught that this is bad, and so you're like, I won't do that.
Right.
Versus I just haven't enabled myself to let go of that shadow side.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so this is where the healing comes in. So we talked about feeding, speaking, and then there's healing. So that shadow side and being able to really go, okay, wait a minute, there's something here that I now have as a program or a condition that came from my life circumstances or life events. Maybe it's time for me to look at those things and really see what can I do to overcome that programming and that conditioning. But the shadow can have different aspects, not just our psyche-emotional aspects. It can have physical things like scar tissue from childbirth or pelvic floor tears, something like that. Going through life changes that can cause a biochemical change. So there's also biochemistry that can affect it, and then bioenergetics. So we're bioenergetic before anything else. So what's happening in the body system and the energy system and in our emotional systems that are creating these shadows, and how can we bring the unconscious material with sexuality conscious? So working with bioenergetics, I'm looking at the other three realms too, because they all affect each other. So if like somebody has scar tissue in the midline, it's cutting through the energetic meridian in the front of the body. So we want to know that, like, okay, because that's going to affect libido, that might affect sensation, and we want to work with that. So it's like I'm an erotic detective a lot of times in the shadow realm, because it's like, okay, let's see, let's find this, let's like really dig and look at all these different areas to see what could be the original cause. Because once we get to the original cause, then we can start to unravel it. So for example, scar tissue, if I find that can be affecting the whole system. And then we're going to do castor oil massage. Castor oil breaks down ricinoleic acid. So for anybody listening who has scar tissue and that maybe that's causing pain. So
and is it usually scar tissue in the stomach, or?
It can be, C-section scars, episiotomy scars. It's a lot of what I work with when we're looking at scars.
I never thought that connects to your,
Yep.
like your libido, and whoa.
Yeah, and I see that frequently. I was actually working with a client last year who had a surgery and was having trouble with erectile function and just couldn't understand. I was like, as soon as I heard about the surgery, I was like, there we are. And we did a couple scar tissue things and like helped with his mental, because what starts happening is like, oh, first time something wrong happens, then the brain starts to spin, right? And so once we cleared all of that, then he was fine.
Yeah, I had so many gut issues for a while, like really bad gut issues, that I was having a lot of pain. And I didn't really put the two together because I was like, well, the vagina and the gut is two very different parts of the body.
Nope, it's all connected. It's fascinating to me how something in the gut, exactly, and then how that's affecting the whole system.
That's when I very first heard about pelvic flooring, because I was like, what the hell is that?
Right.
Do you actually mind explaining it if no one at home knows?
Yeah, so pelvic floor is the muscles that basically are like holding all of this. And so in our erectile tissue is between the pelvic floor, which I love because as soon as you're squeezing and getting these different layers of your pelvic floor strengthened, then you're squeezing the entire erectile tissue. And so you can give yourself orgasms just by strengthening and getting resilience. But I really like to think of it like there's strength. Because sometimes we can just like any muscle, if you like overtrain just one muscle and you also don't have flexibility and you don't have resilience in that muscle, then we need to also have resiliency. We need to have flexibility. And so tissue that's resilient is like when you touch it and then you can see that it responds to that touch in a certain way as opposed to like it's mushy. You know, so we want that resiliency, or does it bounce back? Does the elastin bounce back? And so we want all of these different things within the pelvic floor. So even just as we're sitting here, I do pelvic floor exercises all the time. And part of that is just to get my sexual energy and my aliveness going. It's like a pump and it's fueling your whole body. And so these different layers of muscles, when I was 19, I was like, I'm going to learn how to move each layer and isolate each layer in my pelvic floor.
Whoa.
And so I started just like, okay, these are the ones that stop the flow of urine, and let me like pay attention to and like get just these. And, okay, here's the anal sphincter. Now let me get the anal sphincter online. Now here's high in the vaginal canal near the cervix, and now can I
control there?
Move all of that? And then I started to wave them. Like I became obsessed when I was 19 years old. This was, I was destined to be a sexologist, I guess.
And then from the age of 13, I think you said, right? Yeah. This is amazing. I can't believe you have that much control. Okay, so thank you for explaining that. So
and that changed. So like when I had my baby, I lost I mean, it was great that I had that control because when I was giving birth, I could like push and do certain things with that. So it helped me a lot in that process. But, then I had to rebuild. And that was a whole other process and a whole other journey.
Well, that's actually fascinating to think about how many, if you've had a child then compared to before having a child, your blueprint types change because of that?
They can, and I have seen this in my practice where a life event will cause the blueprints to shift. So menopause, a big life crisis, something like that, or some kind of change in relationship can cause it to shift. Having a baby can cause it to shift. Because we're not just the blueprint, we're also the biochemistry. We're also what's happening to us physically. We're also emotional. And so all of that plays a role into, and that's why there's actually your blueprint type, but there's also the core erotic blueprint is taking into account these 4 things that I've been talking about in terms of biochemistry, bioenergetics, physical, and emotional.
Wow. Can you give me an example then for each of those?
Yeah, so biomechanical would be the scar tissue I was talking about, or let's say lack of flexibility, an injury that you've had in some way that is creating, like I can't get into that position on my knees anymore. That would be biomechanical. And then biochemical is the hormones and the hormonal state. And so it's also the chemistry between you and your partner.
So would that be like so that's why you said kind of things like menopause and stuff?
Yeah, or your testosterone's low. And I think a lot of women don't think about, testosterone. But having low testosterone is going to affect sexual function. Have you heard of the T-shirt study?
No.
No?
Oh, I think I might. Explain it to me.
Yeah, so in the chemistry between you and another person, there's a nerve in your nose called cranial nerve 0, and it goes to the sex centers of the brain. And so what it's doing, though, I think is fascinating, is that it's reading the immune system of your partner with your immune system, so that if you were to have a child, you would have a child with a really healthy immune system. Now, they did a study with women where they had them smell a T-shirt to smell the pheromones to see what would happen. And the women who are on birth control could not smell the signature of attraction of that chemistry that they would have with someone who would create, because of the immune system, a best child, a strongest child. But then when they went off birth control, and so it was interesting because then I have women who go off birth control like, I'm not attracted to my husband anymore. And it's because of the pheromonal signature. So attraction, it has something to do with the chemistry with this cranial nerve.
And what about even the gut? Like, so that, the immune system,
Right.
How would that work both ways as well?
I would think so. And the interesting thing about gut health is the serotonin. And I think that then plays a role because if we look at like some of these neurotransmitters and hormones in our body, serotonin is the bonding aspect. And so if your gut health is all affected, then how is that affecting the bonding between you and your partner? And we got dopamine. And even in orgasm, we're looking at also the phases, Masters and Johnson's phases with orgasm. We've got acetylcholine, we've got dopamine, and I am a high dopamine woman. So I'm like, have the orgasm, now get on to the next thing. You know, like that, and that's part of my high dopamine phase is that I like that variety. But if I was high serotonin, then that would be different. Or GABA, serotonin and GABA are lower in my body. And so that's always important for me to know is like, well, what's happening and can I boost that so that I have more bonding capacity versus like, oh, new shiny object, you know, when I had one foot out the door. Okay, well, wait a minute, maybe GABA and some serotonin supplementation might help me then really feel all in with this relationship.
Whoa, is that what you did then? You took some supplements?
Yeah, I actually did supplement because I knew my neurotransmitters and that I was high acetylcholine and dopamine, which is great because acetylcholine and dopamine are great for orgasm and for arousal. But then the bonding side of things wanted to just supplement a little. And a lot of people don't have awareness in this area, except for the energetic blueprint has a lot of awareness, maybe not like cognitively, but they can feel it. They feel when something's off. They feel when something's not right. And so their hair might stand on end about something. And so you have to be really attuned when working with an energetic.
Is that where, like, would you have to have more communication in that if you're an energetic then?
I think you have to have more communication that is body-aware communication. So there's the words we can use, of course, always have that foundation. But there's an attunement and a listening. I always say if I could teach people one skill, it's awareness. And people always say to me, like, Jaiya, you have such an attunement. You have such an attuned touch. And that's from years and years of listening and learning to listen, not just with my hands, but with my being, that I'm there and I'm present with someone. And I'm listening for all the subtle cues all the time. And that allows me to be a really good energetic lover because I have that attunement, which not everybody has because we haven't been taught how to have that level of awareness and attunement.
Yeah, because I can just imagine most of us, or a lot of us, don't even know our own body, our own sensations to get attuned with ourselves, let alone even getting in tune with your
another
partner.
person, right? So it starts with you, really. I mean, can you even just like spend 5 minutes with your wrist? How often do we just even spend with a body part time? And so can you be so attuned to every little curve and the temperature and how things feel under your fingertips? One of the exercises I had to do when I was in massage school was we would put hair in a Bible because Bibles have really thin pages. And we would feel the hair through the page. And then they'd turn a page. And then you'd have to feel the hair through the next page. And then turn the page and feel the hair through the next page. So that you're attuning your fingertips to being able to feel that hair with each page that they turned. And I loved that exercise because it really gave me this awareness in my fingertips now of being able to feel very subtle changes that are happening in someone's body. Stillness is so hot for an energetic. It's where the orgasm often happens for them. So if you have been having a lot of activity and then you just drop into stillness and you just drop and you breathe and you listen with your hands without any movement, there's so much happening.
So let's talk about the 5 stages then that if people are listening right now, that they can go through.
So there's 5 stages. First one is resting, and this is somebody who's not having sex. So, and this could be, you're doing this by choice. Perhaps you're in a resting phase because you're like, I just need to take a break. I just need to practice some celibacy, or a spiritual choice that you're going to practice celibacy. Although what's interesting even there is like, you look at like Tantric Tibetan Buddhists and they would practice celibacy, but they had a consort that they would imagine was, that they would make love to. And so sexual energy wasn't bad. It's not that it was bad. It was just a choice because they were doing a renunciate path and choosing as a monk not to have sex. So that would be a resting phase. Doesn't mean that it might not necessarily have sexual energy or eroticism to it.
That's what I was going to say, because if you're an energetic, then you're still getting the senses.
Exactly. You're still getting the sensations just as much. I mean, somebody can hover their hand over you and you can go into complete orgasm just from that, or just from visualization or meditation. That's a lot of my practice because I love that as an energetic.
So what would you do? How do you avoid doing that then if you're in resting phase?
For me, I have a little different relationship because I've been practicing this for so long. But for me, it's like a switch and I can just even just visualizing or shutting down my erotic energy, especially if it's like, I'm not going to walk around with my erotic energy in full bloom in the middle of Los Angeles. I mean, that might be interesting.
You could.
But, I kind of see it like a dial of I can turn it up, I can turn it down, and I can tune into that sensitivity. Even the way that I dress, like right now I'm a little bit more open, but if I'm wearing a hoodie or baggy sweatpants, like that might help me regulate that a little more. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So if you're a sensual, is that, because actually earlier you said though with the sensual, just blindfold yourself. And now it actually accentuates your other senses.
Absolutely.
So if you're a sensual, would covering up make a difference?
It could. It depends on how you feel within that. So if like my partner loves when I'm more covered up, it turns him on more. And so I know that it turns him on. So covering up in the sensual becomes more of a turn on because I know that it turns him on.
What is that type then if you're getting turned on by somebody else getting turned on?
Oh, that's like, it's called compersion. And so compersion is when my partner is turned on, I'm turned on. And so I have high compersion. So when people around me are turned on, I'm just feeding on. That's partly energetic. I think that's also ties into my energetic. I'm just turned on because there's so much erotic energy in the space.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got resting.
Resting, and then after resting, we move into healing. And so the way I see it a little differently, have you ever heard of Ken Wilber?
No.
So he talks about stages and states of consciousness, and it's a similar modeling in that here a stage is more like we get fixed into it, and a state is where it's fluctuating more. And we really would love for these to be a bit more fluctuating, more like a state that you're moving through all day long or, throughout the month, but they can get stuck into being a stage. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. They're not hierarchical. It's not like one's better than the other. Like I will consciously choose times of rest because I need that. And then it helps fuel me for the next evolution. So as we go into healing, I was in the healing stage, for example, after I had my son, because you can't have intercourse in that time because my body needed to heal. Or maybe you've had a breakup and you need time to really heal after a breakup. So that healing phase, again, very valuable. You just don't want to get stuck there.
Right.
Like, now I'm healing for the rest of my life and I'm not reintegrating with my partner and my eroticism and my aliveness because I've shut down in some way. So, and again, I want to tell people, like, you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you if you're in a healing or resting phase. You're whole and complete just as you are. And I think that's something people really worry about around sex. Am I broken? Am I wrong? Am I weird? Are my genitals okay? These are some of the questions that I get most.
Yeah, or why can't I, have an orgasm? Everyone else says it's so easy,
Or even just hearing me talk, people may think, oh, well, I'm not having that kind of orgasm. And I like to share just because I like to share what's possible, but there's nothing wrong with you if you don't want to have ejaculatory orgasms or energetic multidimensional orgasms or, foodgasms. There's nothing wrong with you if you're not having that. And any of it can be developed. And I say that because over all the years in my practice, I have seen people develop and cultivate these kinds of orgasms if you want to, but there's nothing wrong with you if you're not having them.
And I love that because especially the if you want to, because that's what I'm always trying to do with my audience, right? Like empower them, give them the tips and tools to then take this all information, this freaking masterclass that you're teaching us right now, and then deciding what's right for them, how they feel. But it's the feeling lost that I think is really disempowering for so many of us women, especially, as more has been talked about, to your point that you actually said earlier, is like you're an expert, you had all these tips and you still weren't getting it. You just feel that shame even get more heightened. Do you find then a lot of people get stuck in the healing phase?
Yeah, I feel people do get stuck in the healing. They also get stuck in curious, which is the next one, which is I'm just going to learn about it and not actually do the thing. I'm going to gather all the information, listen to all the podcasts, read all the books, but I'm not going to actually put into action things. I mean, how many of us have courses and books on the bookshelf that we're maybe flip through, didn't read, and then we don't put into action even more. So how are you taking this information, this content, and putting it into action? Are you using the healing phase as an excuse not to do things? Because we want to honor our bodies. This is where it's tricky. You want to honor your body. You want to honor where you're at. You don't want to override yourself. But if you've been in the healing phase for a really long time, you may want to look at, wait a minute, what is my resistance to actually moving out of this phase? What's going on in one of those other 4 obstacles that we talked about, the bioenergetic, the emotional, the physical, or the biochemical? I want to look at those and see, okay, now I need to move out of that.
Okay. So you've got the resting,
resting,
healing,
healing, curious, and then we go into adventurous. So adventurous is when we're ready to get out of the comfort zone. We're ready to go on the adventure. We're ready to do the things. So this may look like trying something you've never done before. It's going to that kink class when you're scared and learning about the rope tie. When Ian and I were doing our 40/40 project, we were going to classes all the time because, again, zero, I didn't have a lot of wisdom or knowledge in that area. And we went to rope tie classes. We went to different like dominance classes to learn, impact classes. We did a lot of study during that time. I actually studied with a dominatrix, and that was fascinating because I got to like in the field learning about what she did and like following her and apprenticing with her, and that was really amazing.
Okay, so you got the adventures. Do you advise people watch porn in this stage, or is like
if that feels like an adventure and it feels like it's something that you're using healthfully, where you're staying embodied. So it's interesting. This question of porn has been coming up a lot lately. And, what do I think about it? How's the right use of it? And just like any tool, what right use is. And so are you using it to go away from your partner and you're creating, again, that somatic groove that becomes a rut and a grave because it becomes your only path because there's so much shame about it or any of that? Are you using it to stay in your body, or are you using it to dissociate from what's happening in your body? Are you doing it quickly and in shame in a way that now is creating, again, another somatic pattern in your body? Or are you using it consciously and as a tool, and then you can put down the tool?
What if you and your partner have, let's say you're going down this adventurous phase, but you just have different types of porn that you're interested in? Is it like experimental, trying to be open to both sides? You can see that I'm just asking for a friend here, right? I'm like, I need the storyline, I need the firefighter coming in to save the woman, and my husband just wants to go straight to it.
Yeah, and that's blueprints again. And I think it would be fascinating if somebody started a company where they actually like did all of the blueprints. I think that would be really amazing because we see so much of sexual and kinky mostly in porn. There are some feminist movements within the porn industry that make more of a sensual porn, but like what would energetic porn look like? That's fascinating. Can we appeal to shapeshifters more and have like a variety within the erotica?
But I actually love how you broke down the ways to identify when and how you're using porn as a mechanism with everything that we're talking about.
Right. It's just like your vibrator, And again, I come back to just like with food and quality of things in my life. Is it being created ethically? Are people being treated fairly? I think that's a really important thing to take into as you're looking at this genre. Are people being empowered or are people being disempowered?
Yeah, that's super strong. Okay, so after the adventurous?
After adventurous is transformational. And this is when we get into the what's more about sexuality. So things like Tantra.
More?
Yeah, like, okay, sex just can't be for procreation or for pleasure. Like, what else is sex? What else are we utilizing sex for? If we're looking at sex as a tool, we've been talking about that. And I want to expand the definition of sex because I think we haven't talked about that. And I think we have a limited definition of sex because the sexual blueprint is what we think of when we think of sex. But actually, if you look at what energetic sex looks like, it's very, very different than intercourse. So intercourse is not sex. I want to peel that out. Really, what sex is in your blueprint. How are you using that consciously for your own evolution and awakening? To me, sex, and this is my energetic speaking, sex is a tool for our own self-realization. Sex is a tool for us to know ourselves even more deeply and to live more full, ecstatic lives.
What's the problem with that confusion?
I think the problem with that confusion is that it only takes into account one blueprint, the sexual blueprint. So then everybody else feels bad, wrong, and broken for the way that they're utilizing sexuality. And so in the transformational stage, when you're in that stage, this also speaks to the stage that I'm in. I spend a lot of time in the transformational stage, is that sex then becomes this event or connection that is bringing me more positivity, is bringing me more wellness, is bringing me more wealth, is bringing me more of everything, more of me into me.
This is, by the way, blowing my mind. I am loving everything you're saying. It's so freaking informative.
Thank you.
And so now I'd love to dive into, are there ways that you have seen the hardest combinations of partners with incompatibility with the different types?
This is something that I talked about a lot in the book. There's a chapter just going through each compatibility of all the different blueprint types. What I think is interesting is that most people think that, oh, if I have the same type, that's going to be the best.
Right.
And it isn't necessarily the best. I think we're trying to complete ourselves erotically. And so we are attracting opposite blueprint pairings. And it could also be that the most people come to me have a mismatch. They're coming because they feel that mismatch in their eroticism. Sexuals and energetics tend to be the pairing that I see have a lot of difficulty. And a lot of times it's because the sexuals, it's so physical. Sex is the physical act of intercourse. And then you got an energetic who's like, please just hover your hands over my body, or please just do really, really slow, light, attuned, present touch. And the sexual is like, no, I want to go until you have an orgasm. So they really have a hard time, the sexuals have a hard time relating to how an energetic feels so much with just something like this. And the energetic has been shutting down for so long because the sexual has been coming at them. It's what it feels like. It's not that the sexual is actually coming at them like that. It's that the energetic feels accosted all the time because they're wanting slow attunement and presence and spaciousness.
And what are the ones then that do work the best together?
What up, homie? I got something free and new to share with you right now.
How often are you visited by that negative voice in your head telling you that you're not smart enough, that you're not good enough, experienced enough, not fill in the blank? One of the most powerful things you can learn to do in life is to turn that negative voice into your bestie. And I want to teach you how to do that and so much more in my 4 Steps to Becoming Confident workshop. And guys, the most amazing thing is you can actually register for completely free for this workshop. So click the link on your screen and I'll see you on the inside.
I find the sensual and the kinky work really, really well together. And it's in my partner, so it's interesting to watch within him. I have the sexual energetic in me, and those two, because I have them so much in me, I can watch them battle each other. My energetic's like, slow everything down. My sexual's like, come on, let's get to it.
Oh, yeah. So how do you navigate those? And then how do you know, do you have like a primary?
Yes. So typically you'll have a primary blueprint and then a secondary blueprint, but you're really a mix of all of them. Unless you have a 0%, like my partner and I did, then you need to cultivate or develop or expand into that if you want to. And so what I've done to reconcile this inside of myself is to allow my energetic more space, just like I would with a partnership. I have this partnership within me of energetic and sexual primarily. And so how do I have times where my sexual can just go for it? And how do I have times where my energetic can rest into something?
Now that we've laid all that out, I'd actually love to break some myths, because the myths are the things that I think that we very much hold on to, and that if we can break the myths or combat the myths, then it can allow people to then go and explore the blueprints that you've laid out. So you've written these in the book, but I'd love to just go through some. So you put that something must be wrong with me if you're not having mind-blowing sex, or and you actually say normal doesn't exist.
So yeah. Something's wrong with me if I'm not having mind-blowing sex. No, what's often there is that you haven't figured out who you are. And it's not that there's anything wrong with you, because we're all wired differently in the bedroom. So once you find out what your blueprint is, then you can start to work from there. Or something's wrong with me because my hormones are off. No, we can optimize hormones. Like there are so many things that you can do. Again, you're not bad, wrong, or broken. Yeah.
Okay, number 2, the problems in your sex life are because of your incompatibility. It's not about being on different pages. It comes down to 3 things. You do not know who you are and what turns you on erotically.
Yep.
You are not communicating honestly about sex.
Yes.
How many people do that?
A lot of people. I think there was a statistic I read once that said 76% of women are faking orgasms. And I was like, stop. We need to start communicating honestly about sex. Honesty is a huge turn on. It's an aphrodisiac. But if you're doing it harshly, that's different. Honesty done from the heart is a turn on, I'd say. And so this piece of like, why are we lying? Because it's not doing any other woman a service. I can't tell you how many men have come to me and they're like, well, nobody complained in the past. I'm like, yeah, because we don't complain about it.
It's true. I think there's like this statistic, right? If you've actually slept with this many people statistically speaking, at least 3 of them have been faking it.
Right. So please, everyone, stop faking it. No more faking it. Please be honest in the bedroom, because it's going to build more intimacy and your body's not going to shut down. Because if you're faking it and the person thinks that that's the right thing to do, they're going to keep doing that thing because they think that you're turned on by it. And then your body eventually is going to go, nope.
Yeah, I think also, to your point where that person said to you was like, every other woman's been okay with it. I think it goes to almost like the confidence part of it, because you want to be a stud in bed. Like, who doesn't want to actually be a stud in bed? I don't think anybody says they don't want to. So, you want to be that person. And so if you can't do it, now you start to think, going back to the other one where like, oh my God, I'm broken. I don't want them to know I'm broken.
Right.
That's going to wreck my confidence. So I'm just going to,
Right. That's a really good point. So I don't speak up. Like, what are all the reasons why we don't speak up? We don't want to hurt our partner. We don't want our partner to think we're broken. And then they're like, oh God, this is going to be complicated. Because we don't want to lose love. It really comes down to, we don't want to lose love. So I'll fake it instead, or I want to get it over with. And then once we get it over with, we can get on to the rest of the things that we're doing. And that's a big one for sensuals.
I want
to get back onto the things I need to get done. I need to get back to my to-do list. So I'll just do this and get it over with and not say anything about it, instead of really taking the time that it takes to communicate and build that intimacy with someone. Yeah.
Ooh. Okay, number 3, sex tricks and techniques will solve it all.
Yeah, we talked about that. That's a big one. I mean, that was a big myth for me. I thought I knew them all. So I should be able to turn my partner on, but I didn't know his blueprint. That was what it came down to.
Kinkiness comes from a pathology.
This was an exploration with my partner and I, because he was kinky. He kept thinking, what's wrong with me in my past that I am this way? What's wrong with me that I like these things that are outside the box? And I'll never forget, we went to this one coach and he said, why don't you just stop asking why you're turned on by it and enjoy it? And that was a turning point for us, because then we're like, okay, yeah, I mean, we haven't found anything in his history. And there's actually been some research done that people who participate in kink actually have healthier communication ability and healthier skills, just because they can talk about these things more easily.
Is that because like you're having, I went straight to like kind of bondage really, I'm not sure why, but like safe words, and that all comes with like communication, the need of that communication.
So to practice kink safely, you have safe words. Of course, when it's done within a healthy container, these
always,
are here, right?
Thank you. Yeah.
And so, talking about your safe words, talking about, here are my turn-ons, here's what's okay, here are the hard limits of what's off the table. And now we're in a much richer conversation about sex, which a lot of people never even have. They go 40 years in relationship and they've never had a conversation about consent. And so even if you've been married 20 years, 40 years, 50 years, let's have a conversation about, wait a minute, maybe there's something that's been on the table for us that we need to take off the table because we have assumed consent. Oh, now we're married, now we have all this consent that is assumed. And some people find consent not sexy. I think it's really sexy. But some people find that like, oh, I don't want to be asked all the time. Well, then just have blanket consent. You don't have to ask me to touch me.
Oh, you're saying like in a relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think a big part is almost like feeling the obligation that because I'm married or because I'm been with this person, I'm obligated to do this. How do you overcome that feeling of the obligation? Because the more obligated you feel that you have to have the sex, I would assume the less you're going to enjoy it.
Yep, and the less you're going to speak up.
And exactly.
It perpetuates the cycle. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that again, these dyads, and I have a bunch of these in the book, but one of them is to sit down with your partner and start to open up the box of this communication. I often say, just blame me. I heard Jaiya on this podcast and this woman, and she says we should do this exercise. Like, you can blame me for opening up that conversation, but also talking to your partner about what would have you feel safe to talk about sex with me. And one of my favorite dyad prompts is tell me something about you and sexuality. And then you can just start to open up the box. It doesn't have to be like a super tell me everything that you've never said to me heavy conversation. It can really be like just tell me what you want me to understand about you, because I think we all seek to be understood. And in this, again, it's not a conversation. We really want to just go back and forth with the prompt and hear them and then say thank you if we understand. And it's that simple. And do that for 20, 40 minutes. Ian and I, my partner, we do this all the time, where we will just sit and do a dyad on something business related or related to parenting, so that we can understand more where the other person's coming from And then maybe we want to make different choices out of that clear, effective communication that we just had.
What what other prompts can you use in that in the obligation that can allow that now to really kind of like lift the weight of it? Because again, you're so tactical, and I love how you've got that in your book. And then it was interesting, you said it's not a dialogue, it's a back and forth.
Yeah,
or it's not a conversation.
It's not a conversation, because in a conversation we hear their partner say something, we want to add something, or we want to ask another question about that. Instead, we're just seeking to understand, and we're making contact with them in a really deep way of giving them our presence while we're here. And so one of the things I love is a relationship evolving dyad. So there's 3 prompts in that. Tell me something you love about me. And so it starts with tell me something you love about me, because that right away builds this rapport with each other. It builds this connection with each other. It disarms, because you're just going back and forth and sharing something that you love about each other. And then the next one is tell me something you want me to understand about you, and whatever topic, or it can just be tell me something you want me to understand about you. So in this case, we're talking about sex, or we could talk about things you say yes to and really don't want to do. You know, so like we're not using the word obligation, because I think obligation and sex together feels really icky. So tell me something you want me to understand about you, and our sex life could be another easy one. So there's a couple of different ways we could put in there in that understand about you one. And then last one is tell me something you think we agree upon about sex, or whatever topic, you know, that it is that you're working on.
And so you both answer that and see if it's the same?
Yep. And it's not necessarily about agreeing. So I think this is also really interesting. It's about understanding. So it's what you think you're agreeing on. And then it's like, oh, but I understand that. I don't necessarily agree about that, but I understand that. And I think that's a really tricky one, because like, okay, what do we agree on? But you may not agree that you're agreeing on that, but you can understand them about why they're coming from that.
That's so powerful, because I think especially as we're talking about like sex is so intimate that it feels like, well, if you don't agree, like, can you actually make it work?
Yeah, you can, because it's what you are perceiving that you agree upon. As long as you have an understanding of each other and a willingness, then you make it work.
Yeah. Oh God, I love that. And talk to me about the sexual mask.
The mask is when we have a masking over, because it's what we think culture and society tells us we need to do. And so a lot of men get a sexual mask because they think that that's what they have to be. In the Netflix show, in Sex, Love, and Goop, the character there, I don't want to give away a spoiler, but he has an arc because he had a mask on. And oftentimes it gets ingrained. Women get the sensual mask the most. And what I see is that men get the sexual mask the most. But what's underneath there, especially so when we start to get in the body, just like I talked about the kinky coming out, for a lot of men, the energetic actually starts to come out when I start to get them into playing the A-B game, which is something I go through in the book. Of just going through these different kinds of touches. Here's touch A, here's touch B, which one do you prefer? I start to see a lot more energetic come up.
And that's because you're basically taking the mask off.
We're taking the mask off because we're going into the body, because it's what their mind has thought. It's their programming. It's the conditioning that they've been conditioned to be in. And we start to unravel that programming and then see what's the truth actually going on in the body.
God, this is so powerful. So how much in everything we've spoken about, literally my mind is swelling with information here. I just have loved this discussion so much. How much have you seen this now really impact people's relationships? Because the reason why I think sex is so important, I think many of us, including myself, I was brought up in a very, Greek Orthodox family where my grandmother would tell me that the baby was brought by a stork. Like she actually would say those words. There was no sex education in my school whatsoever. And so I've just been learning about this all as an adult, and the show is kind of a bit of a ruse to have people like you on to keep teaching me, even though I've been married for 21 years. And so really thinking about what are those elements that can help people have this beautiful relationship, and sex being such a big part of it. How much have you found that these blueprints and people understanding them has really improved people's relationships?
It was really interesting when I first started. I had my private practice and I started noticing these patterns show up, the 5 blueprints. And then I was like, okay, I think there's something actually here that could really help people. because I started seeing like people who had struggle with arousal now were able to get aroused, and how that was increasing the connection between their own partner. And then I saw it in my own life, of course, between my partner and I, and how it turned things around for us. And so I remember the first time I spoke about it and everybody coming up to me afterwards like, oh my God, everything makes sense now. Like my last relationship makes sense. Everything that we're struggling with my partner makes sense. And so then I was like, okay, there's something actually really here. And then I'd speak of the next thing and people would come up with, wow, this just completely changed my life and the way I'm thinking about work even, like, or the way that I'm thinking about my relationships with my kids, because I'm noticing I'm forcing my daughter to hug me and my daughter doesn't want to hug, you know, like she's an energetic and I have been non-consensually, we thought something was wrong with her, something like that, where we start to see like there was a really big wave of impact. And then when the Goop show came out, that was a whole other wave of impact because there were millions of people coming and taking the quiz and we were receiving all of this live feedback. And then we've trained 300 coaches. And so it feels like my legacy. It feels like the thing that I've left the world. And I feel very complete at this point in terms of this is now something that's out into the world. And I hope that everybody has this book, you know, on their bookshelf, and that sex education, we even have it starting to go into high schools to have this sex education coming for people. Some of our coaches have gone into high school to start teaching. And that's fascinating because there's a whole difference in generations, which I didn't even realize. Age wasn't something we put on our quiz. And so then how do blueprints vary among generations is a really interesting, fascinating thing to think about as well. And what's going to be the impact on the world as this becomes a language around our sexuality, because one of my goals was elevating sexual consciousness on the planet. And this gives us a way to start to talk about it and start to become self-realized people in this area that has been such a shadow and such a taboo, and that we've had so much shame around.
Yeah, God, when I think about, you know, like the love languages, everyone loves them and everyone does the, you know, takes the quizzes and, you know, same with like the personality traits. And yet that we've never had the sexual like types is so mind-blowing and is really impactful. And I think I said this right before we were rolling, but I really believe this is the foundation book that everyone's going to start to use when they talk about sex in a very healthy way. Like everyone's going to come back to you and this book. I really believe that it impacted me that much.
Thank you. Thank you. That's what I wrote it for. You know, I wrote it so that we could start to have a wave where we can take this all out of the shadows and into the light of consciousness so that sex changes. I really think that's part of the darker aspects of sexuality come because we don't have frameworks. We don't have conversations about it. And that allows that those aspects that become neuroses or become violent, you know, to proliferate because we can't have the conversations.
Yeah. So you say that to have pleasure forever, what are the 3 things we need to do?
3 things. First is to know yourself. And that comes to the blueprints. So once you know it, you own it. I believe that we're each these unique, beautiful expressions of consciousness, just like a flower blooming. And a flower doesn't become ashamed of its bloom because there's so much variety of flower. It's like, no, bloom, blossom, be your fully expressed self, because that is the gift to the world. And so that's owning who you are as an erotic being. And the last one is to live it. And this came from a coach of mine. You know, he said, Jaiya, you've done all this work and it's time for you to just live like you know. Just live like you know. And that is to now you integrate it into your life. And that's when you know that you fully embodied it and integrated these teachings and integrated your sexual awakening and integrated your sexual journey, is when it becomes part of life. You're just living it.
Jaiya, this has been such a pleasure. Where can people find you and your amazing book?
So the book is available all over on Amazon, all the places, but you can go to the website eroticbreakthrough.com if you want to take the quiz, find out more. And then my website is jaiya.love, L-O-V-E.
Keep watching to learn the secret to great sex and female orgasms. What actually then holds us back from actually being able to orgasm? So it was the word like, number 1, okay, well, if you fake it, how the hell is your partner supposed to actually get you there? I think that that's going to be a big thing. Hormones. So let's talk about hormones, of how that can also be something that can get in our way.
Oh, yes. So whenever people, they're like, I have a low libido, I have difficulty orgasming, whatever the sexual dysfunction is, they jump right away to like, it must be my hormones. It can be your hormones, but it is often other things going on as well, because so let's say like it starts with hormones. Let's say it starts with low estrogen. It can be estrogen issues because you're postpartum. because you're in menopause. Being on oral contraceptive pills can also mess with vaginal ecology as well and your ability to self-lubricate. And so low estrogen is going to be problematic because it can lead to tissue atrophy, difficulty self-lubricating. The tissue can become more sensitive, more friable. So if it's extreme, you can go to the bathroom, you can wipe, and then you're gonna find that there's blood on the tissue. Like that's how extreme that it can get. And without estrogen, we can't produce the glycogen, the sugar that feeds the good organisms in the vagina. So now we're going to be predisposed to yeast infections, bacterial vaginosis, and then those are going to be problematic. So all of these hinder your sex life. And with shrinking tissue, of course, that's going to affect your ability to orgasm, and you're going to need lubrication. But then we have all this shame about lubrication, right? Like, oh, you're not supposed to use that. You should be able to like self-lubricate, which is not always the case. I mean, depending on where you are in the cycle, if you are a week before your period, it's a dry time. You're going to have a harder time self-lubricating because of where your hormones are at. Your progesterone's up, your estrogen's taking a back seat to that, and that's completely normal. So you have that piece. Now, if you aren't using lubrication, the tissue is becoming inflamed, there's infections, which these are normal organisms that live there, but they become imbalanced. Now, when you have sex, there's an association with pain. You can have pain, discomfort, you're not having an orgasm. Now you're in your head about that, right? You don't want to have pain, or you've had pain in the past, so you have a fear. Now you're trying to have pleasure, but there's a fear around the pleasure. And so that's just one example of one hormone and how it can affect you. But I think where everybody usually goes in their mind is testosterone. Is that where you went?
Oh, I wasn't sure, to be honest, because my thing went to hormones. Like, oh, okay, you just don't feel in your chemicals aren't pumping. That's kind of how I like blanketed it in my head. But then now, to your point of, well, even if your hormones you're not being self-lubricated as much, it's the mental thing that really freaking screws you. Because the second you get in your own head about, oh my God, I'm not as wet, now my husband doesn't think I'm turned on by him, right? Because now I worry, he may not worry, but I worry. He's interpreting this as I'm not into him. And now my mind goes into the whole thing. And so that was why I thought then I wouldn't be able to orgasm. Because of the way the hormone would impact my mind, not necessarily the testosterone versus the estrogen.
Well, and testosterone and estrogen, they really are like the go on the sex pedals. They're like, let's go. Progesterone is like, we're good, because progesterone rises after ovulation. So progesterone is basically like, you had your chance to go collect some semen and get pregnant. We did the egg thing. We're done here. And that is where the phase of your cycle where you're like, you know what? I'm really rather get into sweatpants than get into their pants. Like, I am good right now. And that's the progesterone. And so testosterone, people, I mean, I will sometimes get men who write me and they're like, you need to fix my woman's testosterone because she's not in the mood. And I'm like, you probably need to tend to your home life, and it's more than just testosterone, but low testosterone is associated with low sexual desire. You can have difficulty orgasming, and it can be involved in the arousal process as well. But it's something that I do see low testosterone in women, but it's more common postmenopausal in really high times of stress. It's not usually the main thing that's going on in terms of like what I commonly see. And people are always surprised by that. The birth control pill can definitely tank testosterone. That can be a reason why you have low sexual desire, which is ironic because you're on the pill so that you can have sex, and that is getting rid of that inhibition, which is the fear of having a baby if you don't want one. But then the way it changes your hormones can make it so that you're not in the mood. And you're like, I have yeast infections and my vagina is not self-lubricating and I have no testosterone. So like, I'm not into this. But with testosterone, for people who are curious about it, it's always beyond the low libido. So you'll have lack of motivation, you'll cry really easily. That kick-ass feeling, you won't have that anymore. That like ability to set boundaries, kick-ass, like have a great day. Your energy is gonna be lower, you're gonna be more fatigued, you're gonna see that you have muscle mass wasting, so you'll have less muscle mass, it'll be harder to change your body composition, so you'll have a propensity towards more fat cells and less muscle cells like in the body. That's how things will shift. And so it's not usually just a low testosterone goes low libido and no other symptoms. You're going to have other symptoms with that as well. But you're absolutely right in terms of like the hormones do affect brain chemistry. They absolutely do influence, as we see throughout the menstrual cycle. So for example, when testosterone and estrogen are up, you are going to be more likely to fantasize. So you're going to be running fantasies in your mind. You're more likely to be in like the grocery store checkout line, see a magazine, and your brain to register sex. Your brain to be like, yes, that fellow looks good, or she's looking good. Like, and your brain is going to interpret like, that's sex. Like I'm into this. And so the hormones do absolutely play a role, but I think it's very short-sighted for us to only be talking about hormones. I say that as a hormone doctor, in that it's just women are much more complex than that. And while I do think the hormones should be evaluated, I think there's a holistic approach in this conversation that often gets missed by a lot of practitioners.
So what would you say are the holistic things that we need to, or we can be doing in these situations?
I will tell you, as a hormone doctor who is in a relationship, who's been married for over a decade, working on your hormones is easier than working on your relationship. And so I think
that's a bold statement.
it is very true. I mean, it's so much easier to be like, I'm going to shift my diet, I'm going to get better sleep, like do these things, because it's only you. You just have to be accountable to you.
Yeah.
And I see this all the time with patients where they're like, let's just fix my hormones. I'm like, but maybe you need to talk about your relationship. And they're like, oh, like that. I mean, it can definitely be work. It is definitely something that can be intense, because now we have a dynamic and we have to unpack our stuff and they have to unpack their stuff, and then you're putting it on the table together, and now you've got to sort through it. And like, and then how is your parents, like how is their relationship, like how have your past relationship, like it just becomes so complex and there's so much to it. And so working on relationships, that can't be understated, and working on your communication as well. If you can't talk to someone outside the bedroom about sex, how can you talk to them in the bedroom about sex, about what you want and how to get that pleasure? So there's that component. I think we also need to be looking at things like chronic conditions. So I think it's something that is widely dismissed in women. It's autoimmune disease and any kind of chronic health issue where they struggle for years, exhausted, pushing through. Like we have similar stories in that way of like really struggling with autoimmunity, being dismissed. And that is something that if your body's in survival mode for any reason, even if it's just because you have a stressful job, you're not going to want to be in the mood. You're going to have a harder time having pleasurable sex because your hormones are shifting for survival. So your cortisol is now coming up. You're shifting like, chill out progesterone, which I said can like block you in the bedroom. But yet if you don't have enough of it, you're more critical of your partner, you're more stressed out, you can't get good sleep at night. And so it's taking a look at like you as a whole person, the environment that you live in, your health practices, and what is your relationship like? And so we have to look at all of those layers to really understand, do you have a dynamic that is maybe impeding you in the bedroom, or is that fine? And like what we're dealing with is inflammation, which is taking your testosterone and turning it into estrogen, and now you're feeling cranky and swollen and bloated, and that's not a sexy feeling. That's like not a good feeling at all. And so we really have to dissect that out and understand what is the root cause for you, what's true for you, while also teaching the components of what we started at the top with, of like spontaneous and responsive desire, understanding your gas pedals and your brakes, like understanding these things, because sometimes people think they're not normal when in reality, they're totally normal. It just doesn't look like it does on TV.
Oh my God, that was so good, girl. So like, in your book, you break down like you just did, but you've got, the age, the hormones, the stress, the inflammation, and going back to what you were just saying, my gut issues were going on for years.
Yeah.
And so you want to talk about, I wasn't in the mood, but it really impacted my connection with my husband. And so because I've built my relationship on pure honesty, that was a very hard conversation to have. But to your point of the communication, where I sat down with him and was like, look, it's painful for me. And he was, and of course, my husband's such a gentleman. He was just like, no, we're not doing anything. Like, babe, we need to make sure that your health is okay. And I was like, but we may not be able to have intercourse right now, but I need that connection with you. And he's always so generous. He's just like, but it shouldn't just be one way. Because like, he never felt good about it just being his pleasure. It was always, for both.
Yeah.
And I said, I understand, but actually right now, because I don't know if I can orgasm. I don't know if I use those words, but I don't know if I can get to that. But I still need to feel that connection. I still want to be intimate with you.
Yeah.
And now what does this intimacy look like in a different way, where maybe I can pleasure him and things like that. But to your point of my gut was inflamed, and then I was very stressed out, and I was just tired all the time. And, you know, we then feel shame around that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm unable to please my partner.
Absolutely. And what's important in what you shared is so many people's definition of sex is a penis goes in the vagina. Like, there has to be penetration. And that's why I wrote a whole chapter on sex of all kinds, because there's all kinds of ways to be intimate. I have patients who have significant endometriosis. They cannot have penetration. It is very painful for them. But they can engage in oral sex or outer course. I mean, things that sometimes people think are like, that's some high school juvenile stuff. That's incredibly pleasurable for some people. And so there's lots of ways to connect. And if you look at the research, when people report sexual satisfaction, orgasm is actually lower. It's not one of the top things. Feeling empathy, feeling connected to somebody, actually feeling that intimacy, that's what makes for a pleasurable session no matter what you're doing. And so I think, you know, we talk a lot about the orgasm, everybody wants to try to get an orgasm, and it is, I think, something that is important to have conversations about, but I think it's important for people to understand that lots of people have very satisfying sessions, sexual experiences, and never have an orgasm in that session, and they still rate it very high, but it's because of the connection. So what you're talking about there of like the radical honesty, I mean, it really is radical in like our society, right? To be that honest, you know, that kind of connection, being intimate with someone, just wanting to feel close to them, like doing it for those reasons results in much more satisfaction than somebody going in and just being like, we're just going to get this done so that we can get to orgasm and like be done with it. People report less satisfaction in those sessions.
And I think women need around 14 minutes of foreplay, and men only need like 5.
Yeah, men don't.
I was
Sometimes,
like, wow, even 5's high.
yeah, I mean, sometimes you're just like bending down in the freezer, like getting something out, and they're like, let's go right now, right? Because again, the brain is like, sex, serving that. And some women are like that too. And then they get told that like, oh, you're too much like a man. And I'm like, you're all good. You're all good. Like whatever is working for you. But for women, yeah, I tell my patients, like, give it 20 minutes to warm up. Give it 20 minutes to warm up. And, you know, as we were talking about lubrication before, there's a phenomenon known as arousal non-concordance. And so in the research, they're like, why is it that like some women, it's like their brain is like showing they're turned on, but like their genitals are not turned on. Like what's going on? The brain is what gives consent, and the brain is the one to listen to. If you say yes and the genitals look like they're saying no because they're not getting the memo. The brain's like, we're really into this. And the genitals are like, huh? What? What's going on? And so they're not getting as, as engorged. We're not seeing as much lubrication. That's happening. Nothing's wrong with you. Again, a case for lube. So nothing's wrong with you in that situation. And yet the brain sometimes surveys things. So I've had on my social media, Ask Dr. Brighton, a question that came up a lot, which I found really interesting, is women saying, I don't know what to make of it. I'll be scrolling through my feed on social media and I'll see someone doing a suggestive dance or doing something and I feel aroused. Like my genitals feel aroused. They don't say genitals. They're usually like my clitoris, like I feel my clitoris, or like my vulva like feels juicy, like, you know, using that kind of language. And they're like, and sometimes it's someone of the other gender. Like, am I bisexual? Am I actually gay? Like, what is actually going on here? And I'm like, that is just your brain being like, oh, sex. And the genitals are like, oh, sex, you said sex, okay. And then you're self-lubricating, like you feel this stirring in your nether region, so to speak. That is something as well, that if the brain, if you're like, wait, I'm not into this, you're not into this. That's a no. It doesn't mean that you're switching genders. It doesn't mean you're suddenly attracted to that person. It doesn't mean you want to cheat on your partner or anything like that. The brain just said, hey, this is sex. The genitals were like, yes, sex, love it, here for it. And then you caught yourself and said, I'm not actually into this. The brain is in control there. So if you give consent, but the genitals aren't following, it's still consent. If you say no and the genitals are doing something else, they're just like, I'm already on this train, friend. Like, we're just going that way. But your brain says no, that's not consent.
Wow, I love that you broke that down. And I assume men are not the same.
So here's the thing: men can. So this is like there's so many jokes, and the arousal non-concordance gets talked about a lot more. So right, we have, oh, I'm really into her, but I can't get erect, and it's not necessarily erectile dysfunction. There can be other reasons for that. That's an arousal non-concordance. There are times where, especially like as someone who has a young boy, I'm like, these moments are going to come where they're at the dining room table and the brain picked up something as sex and they don't even know why, and now they have an erection, but they're not turned on, like they're not into this. And so it can definitely happen with men as well. But a lot of times if men are in the mood and they're like, I want to have sex, then their penis is erect and then they're able to have sex, right? And so I think with us, things are a lot more complicated.
I love that you broke that down, because as you were talking, I'm like, I'm just going to be honest. Like, this is just weird for me to say out loud because I'm a little I was brought up when you never talk about sex.
Yeah.
So even this discussion, I freaking love, but there's still a part of me is a little embarrassed. But I'm just going to say it, like, you're 100% right. I can't remember what I was watching. It was like some show and they had gay sex and I was like, why am I turned on?
Yeah.
But it was like, it's not that I want to be a part of man on man sex. Like, but so I was very confused.
Yeah.
And so I turned to my husband. He's like, no, I'm not turned on. And he wasn't hard.
Yeah.
So I'm like, this is very confusing for me because I'm not interested. But it didn't seem
That's
like...
really common, by the way. It's super common, and most people don't say it out loud.
No.
But the homosexual sex, there's a lot of women who will watch that pornography. They are very turned on to it. Part of that can be because it feels like a safer situation as a woman than watching, like, because when it is heterosexual sex, that is, again, very male-centered, and the way that, sometimes things are being done, a woman is like, there's a lot that's being done sometimes in pornography that women are like, that's not actually something I'm into. It's like why we have to have these conversations, because if men are learning their moves from porn, they're not really learning moves. Like, they're learning things that like stimulate their brain and give them the stimulation they need. That as a woman watching that, it's just like, that looks like that hurts. Like, I don't really want to do that. Or like, why are they doing that? And so that's why some researchers believe women are more inclined to watch gay pornography. And so watching men, sometimes they'll watch women as well, but men seem to be like a really safe one.
Wow, I never dawned on me that was the reason. And then it can somewhat be, I've said this a couple of times in this interview, it can be somewhat confusing for a guy.
Yeah.
Because to us, based on exactly what you just said, there's a massive difference between the fantasy and the reality. The fantasy, I'm like, you just want to keep it as a fantasy. You don't actually want it.
Yeah.
But I don't know, do guys do that? But also, it is confusing for guys because my husband was like, but you just said that was a fantasy. And I'm like, but babe, I don't actually want it.
Don't actually want it, yeah. No, so lots of people have fantasies about threesomes. They'll even fantasize about it like while they're having sex with their partner, that they never want to have a threesome. They just like the idea of it. And so fantasies, sometimes people, they keep their fantasies private. Sometimes they want to share it with their partner, and sometimes they do want to act them out. Maybe they have a fetish that they would like to try. All of that is normal. And, when it comes to keeping your fantasies to yourself, sometimes that is what you need to make it hot, to make it something that you're into. And so I've had women ask me, like, if I'm thinking about someone else, like while I'm having sex with my partner, does that mean I'm cheating? It's not cheating. It's not cheating if you're fantasizing about somebody else being present, somebody else being engaged with you. But the thing I caution people is that if you are only thinking about someone else the entire time while you have sex with this person, then you really have to ask, are you using this person as a means to an end just to have sex? Or are you actually wanting to have that intimacy and that connection? Because that's not fair. That's not fair for you to be like, I just want to engage this body while I go somewhere else with my mind. But it is not uncommon for women to have all kinds of different fantasies running in their mind, and especially helping them get to orgasm. And sometimes you need that because the distractions of like, oh, there's a noise in the house, or I have children in the house, or maybe somebody like might hear us at a hotel, or, those kinds of fears. Sometimes you have to go into fantasy land to be like, I need to like escape that. And that actually helps you get present with what's happening in the situation, which seems odd to be like, I have to go into fantasy to be present in my body, but it's so that you're not constantly hit by all these distractions.
Oh my God, that's really powerful. Because I never really thought about it like that. And you kind of, when you don't have an expert like you to talk to, right? Like you get in your own head about what does this mean? But I'm turned on, but I'm thinking about someone. Like it's very confusing for women. And then again, the second you get in your own head, it's like, are you able to be present to then actually enjoy that moment?
Once you get in your head, it's like so hard to come back,
dude,
right?
Yeah, seriously. And you said it earlier. And maybe this is just like the very straightforward question. So if a guy is listening right now, how the hell do you make a woman come?
You ask her. So that's like number one. But so based on the research, we have very little studies in women's medicine and then very little studies into women's sexual health. But we do have some research, and every woman who owns a vulva will understand this, that rhythmic motion. So first, touching the clitoris in a rhythmic motion, slow and low is the tempo. Like we want to keep it. I just quoted the Beastie Boys right now, but slow and low is the tempo. So you want to start with, like not like super light pressure. We're not trying to tickle, but we don't want to go super firm. So it's going to be slowly moving like your hand towards the clitoris, and then low and slow movement. And you want to be rhythmic. And so most women prefer either circular or back and forth. You can use one finger, but most women prefer two, or even all your fingers or the palm of your hand. You can retract the clitoral hood. You can ask her to retract the clitoral hood. But as you're doing this, asking, is this good? Do you like this? Do you want more of this? And I think the hard part is that as you get excited, as the person stimulating the clitoris, not to then speed things up or start changing things up. And I think that's, sometimes when men are about to climax, they speed things up and they go faster. And so they're like, this is my experience, so maybe this is what's good for you as well, when that's not always the case. And so communicating. So that's manual stimulation. But I hear from people that are like, but I want to make her come while we're having sex. Like I want to achieve that vaginal orgasm that Freud talked about. And so, so with that, there is research to show that if she orgasms before penetration, she is more likely to have an orgasm during penetrative sex. And while most men understand that to be true is that they have a very long refractory period. So that means once they orgasm, they're not able to just go round two right away. And so they'll think like, oh, that must be the same for her. Like once she orgasms, it's going to be harder to get her there. Not true. We have a shorter refractory period. Again, the clitoris is always giving, and Mama Nature knew what she was doing. And so you can stimulate her, she can orgasm, then you can go into penetration. She is more likely to orgasm. She may even have multiple orgasms. And while you're penetrating, you still want to stimulate the clitoris. So you can try different positions. She can do it herself. You can do it yourself. You can put a pillow under her hips in missionary so that things are more exposed. Or you can bring toys in. And this is where men will say like, oh, I don't want to have to compete with a toy. It is not a competition. I'm like, you're Batman, and that is literally your utility belt. Like, you just pull out from the utility belt. Like, what is it going to be? Cock ring, vibrator, like, what do you want? Like, what works for you? And so you should be seeing it as an ally. It's not competing with you in any way. And it is going to make things more pleasurable. And in fact, like with some men, I'm like, well, have you ever like tried having any vibration present? No. I'm like, it works for you too. Like it is, it's going to help you too. So those are just some of the things that you can do. But like the number one is you just have to be asking, do you like this? Are you into this? Because even though I'm like, this is what like in general most people like, she may be into something different.
That's amazing. I love how you broke that down. And then as you're talking, it's like we all make it about ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, if the guy is able to get her to orgasm, he feels good. If he's able to get her to multiple orgasm, he feels great. If he's able to get her to multiple orgasm and squirting, he feels like a freaking stud. Right? And so it's almost like, it's you got me here. Yeah. And then vice versa for women. Like I remember where it was like, oh, you can't get hard. Oh my God, what have I done wrong?
Yes,
oh my
right?
God, I must be bad. Oh my God, I can't turn you on.
Yeah.
It is me. I'm the one. And now thinking about the guy, like I'm always trying to see it from both sides of it.
Yeah.
Like even though we've been, had our own rough time of it, I do think of it like, well then that's actually, I feel bad for the guy as well. Because now you're making it about yourself, and then as a woman, you're like, am I not sexy enough? Am I not turning you enough? And then the guys probably thinking, no, it has nothing to do with that. And now everyone gets in their own head, and now you're not having this beautiful like moment that could really like be beautiful. How do we not make it about ourselves and like help that other person get there? And I know you're gonna probably say communication.
Well, I think you also have to, practice throughout the day, checking yourself when you start to make things. So we're on social media, right? And somebody leaves us a comment. Oh my God, like this is about me. Like, how is this? Like, they think this. You know what? People saying nasty things on social media, it's about them. Like, what kind of person goes onto someone else's page and leaves them hateful stuff? Not a well person. Not a well person. But we make those kinds of things about ourselves. So stopping that there. Thinking about all the ways that like you already do that in your day to day, you're going to build that neuronal pathway so that when you get into that situation, you will have the brakes to be like, wait, maybe it's not about me. It's very, very hard. It is I think as women, we are challenged with almost an impossible task, which is loving ourselves and being confident in our bodies, being confident in our relationships while we are inundated from messages in our society that constantly tell us that we're not good enough, that we are the problem. We look at marketing from like the 1950s that was like, if you want to keep a man, you need to douche. Like literally saying stuff like that. Like, oh, he'll leave the house if it smells down there. And I'm just like, I can tell you're a man writing this. I already know. Like, you're really telling on yourself how little you understand about the female body. Yet that kind of undercurrent of marketing, like that is pervasive, right? I mean, we think about things that are like, oh, this is going to be like the age defying because heaven forbid you live long enough that you get old. Like, what is that? But it's the same way when it comes to sexual health. And in the book, I talked about the different things that we see. So like My So-Called Life, Vampire Diaries, like, but for real, like, how are vampires getting erections and getting wet? I just don't understand. I don't understand this. But we see like all of these TV shows and we see all these things where there's no talk of consent, there's no condom, right? It is just like, I see you, you see me, like we're making out. Ooh, now we're having hot sex. Oh, she orgasmed immediately. And like everything is perfect. And so we've got all of that.
And orgasmed vaginally, not clitorally.
Oh yes. It's always like, oh, against the wall in like some like all of these positions. And I'm like, but yeah, I think that's probably gonna get in some people's heads about like, wow, okay, like I should be having this wild, adventurous sex. And so it's a challenge, and we have to acknowledge that it's a challenge. And the biggest thing is just to build the awareness and open communication in your relationship. And if you find that there's anything that seems like, oh, this is not going according to plan, change the plan. So that's why I'm like, here's all of these options of sexual experiences that people have. Like, there are a lot of ways that people find pleasure, they can get off. Like there's many ways to hit the O. And there's many ways to just feel connected to your partner. And so even if things, I think that again, it becomes this like, we have to have vaginal penetration for it to be successful. Even the word foreplay, it said like that word itself indicates that there is something more. You might orgasm with foreplay. You might both be satisfied with foreplay, but because it's called foreplay, the thought is, no, this can't be enough. Like we have to get to the end. We have to arrive at vaginal penetration, which is like not true.
Yeah, it's so true. The blessing and the curse of porn. Like I think porn's getting a really bad rap right now.
Oh yes, we can talk about that.
Yeah, please, let's do it, because I think that like anything, it can be great, it can be detrimental. And so when I think about where we're potentially setting up women and men for failure, there's definitely porn messaging out there that you can just wham bam, thank you ma'am, and you're good to go, you're fine. But then also there is that part of like, porn can be pleasurable and porn can be part of the experience. What if you have different opinions of porn in your relationship?
Yeah, well, gosh, I mean, as much as shame and stigma there is on sex, there's tons on porn. Even the fact that we're talking about this right now, there's already going to be people heated in the comments because people feel very passionately, and they usually feel very passionately, they're very much against it.
Why is that?
Well, it's so the equivalent of men feeling they're in competition with a vibrator is how a lot of women feel about porn. They're in competition with that. And there is messaging from other men who are like, porn ruins you in the way that like it will lower your testosterone, it makes it so that you're not self-disciplined, like all of these, just like why they also are like, you shouldn't masturbate, it'll ruin your hormones. And I'm like, that's false. It's good for your hormones. Men should masturbate or be having ejaculation happening like a dozen times a month for their prostate health. Like we know this, like retention is not the way, friends. So with that, I think people there's a lot of religious connotation, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of misunderstanding about porn, of why people view porn. There's a lot of money made in the porn addiction industry. So there's no real diagnosis for sex addiction, and yet sex addiction, porn addiction, masturbation addiction, there are very much many people with that messaging of pushing that out there, making a lot of money off of doing that. And so we've got that messaging as well. And then of course, there is unethical porn. There is porn that nobody should be consuming. It should be shut down and it should not ever exist. Absolutely, those exist. But at the same time, there is ethical porn. There are companies that are being run by women who are paying women fair wages, that are making sure that women are protected, and it's really amazing. And I would say that, you know, growing up, I definitely got the message of like porn is bad. Like I did not have a sex positive family. I had a don't talk about sex, and if you do, we're going to shame you about it kind of family. And so I got that message as well. When I was practicing in Oakland, California, I had a lot of patients come from the porn industry, and I had no idea until I like got into conversations with them, and they were all talking about how much they love their jobs, how much they were like families, how it was like so satisfying. And it was really interesting to have conversations with people who were part of the industry and loved it so much, and to really see that like these things that people say about porn, the people who are working like in the production, I mean, women working in the production, women who are actually like the stars, all really enjoying their job, all really loving what they do. And so I think, you know, if you look at other societies where they have better sex education, so we just look at like Amsterdam, better sex education, access to sex workers, these things are an important part of society, and people hate that in the US. They hate thinking that sex workers have a place in people's health, but people need that connection. People need pleasure. And sometimes that's the only way that they're satisfying things. I think the problem comes is when we're lying about things, we're in a partnership, we're not being honest, like those kinds of things are the problem. And hiding porn from your partner, I think, is also problematic. And that will really seed even further where people are like, porn is problematic. Why would you hide it otherwise? And it's like shame. Shame is why people hide these things. But you're right. So in a partnership, you have to just have this conversation. Porn has to be consensual. You have to agree on the type of pornography you're going to watch. And there has to be an understanding that if any one person says turn it off, you turn it off. And in anything you do, consent can always be revoked. And if you violate that, that person says turn it off and you say, oh, just give it a few more minutes, like you just burnt the bridge. You just burnt the bridge. It's done. This person, you have violated their trust in that, because they need to be able to feel safe in this. And so your partner might be like, I can try this for 2 minutes and like, then we're good. I actually have, in our house, we have a rule about movies and TV shows. Like if we're going to start something, we're iffy about it. We're like 5-minute rule. 5-minute rule. And we'll give it 5 minutes. And after 5 minutes, we'll check in. And so that's just movies and TV. You can also do that with porn. 5-minute rule. Okay. After 5 minutes, we're going to check in. Is this working for us? Do we want to proceed?
And how much do you think that all of this needs to be discussed either before sex is in, before you actually have the act, or before you actually start having a sexual experience with another person?
So I think, so things are going to evolve. So as you start a relationship, you might not even know that you're like, oh, I might want to watch porn, or I'm really into sucking toes, or like any of these. You might not know that about yourself. And being in this relationship with this person is revealing those things. So as the relationship progresses, now you know you're into this thing. Now you want to have the conversation. You want to ideally have that outside the bedroom, because this is something where, I mean, there can be trauma, there can be a lot of issues that come up. And if you make for a negative experience, it's going to be harder to come back. That's, again, right? Hormones are easier than relationships. Coming back from that's going to be so much harder than talking about it beforehand. So the ideal is before you're in the moment. But sometimes things come up in the moment, when that's when your brain is like, we would really like this. We should do this. And that's where you ask, like, I would really be into this. Like, do you want to try that? Or, hey, can I do this with you? You know, things that get labeled as kink, they're actually really common. Like, it's funny that we think like this is that like seedy kink stuff. So like spanking is part of kink. It's really common in relationships for people to enjoy spanking. So I use that as an example of like, you might be in the moment, you're in a position and you're like, I really want to spank this person. You need to ask first. You don't want to just spank someone, and you want to start gentle. Again, slow and low, like keep it gentle. And then you can ask, like, you know, would you like it harder? Like, you know, do you like that? Can I, you know, do you like it when I grab you? Like, you know, these kinds of things like that. You're getting the consent, and then you're getting the feedback in real time, because you may get excited and think like, oh, this is a really, you know, great thing, and I'm really into it, and they're into it. But if you're not asking, or they're not giving you the cues and the feedback that is saying like, I am into this, like you're gonna run into a problem. And now nobody's satisfied, everybody's stopping, and the fun's done.
Yeah. What's happening in your body chemically when that happens? So because I'm thinking through, like, in that moment, right, it's really heated.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, this is great. And then the next day you're like, oh, actually my hormones led me astray, and actually it was my body wanting, but my mind now regrets it.
Oh yeah, that's super common. You know, I actually heard Brene Brown say the vulnerability hangover. And I was like, that's exactly what happens after sex. Like, she's talking about, oh, you know, talking about intimate things and being vulnerable. And yet during sex, you're so vulnerable. And then you do things, right? You do things and you're like, oh my God, I loved that. That was so great. And then the next day you're like, what does that say about me? And what do they think? And like, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And maybe that's a bad thing. And like, oh God, did I hurt my body in a way that I'll never come back from? Like, we start to spiral in that way. It can definitely happen. But I think part of it too is that, like, when it's just like what people will call vanilla sex, right? Missionary, cis hetero sex, like, that is something that we are told is acceptable, is safe, like is normal. When you deviate outside of that, there is the risk that afterwards you're going to think like, oh gosh, I really wish I hadn't done that. Now, you may very well be like, I wish I hadn't done that because I actually didn't enjoy it. I actually didn't want it, and that's a different thing.
Of course,
But
yeah.
I think that, you know, that vulnerability hangover, that after the fact, like, I don't have like all this dopamine and all these hormones floating around in my brain anymore, not feeling that anymore. And now afterwards, to remember that you are being a historian and going back and looking at the event now from the outside and judging it from the outside rather than the experience in the moment. Like, you were consenting to these things, you were in the moment, it was good for you in the moment, but now historian you puts on your little spectacles and is like, no, you're a bad person for doing that.
Because all of your belief system comes
Exactly.
flooding back in.
Yeah. And everyone else's ideas about who you should be comes into play.
Right, yeah. What's happening when it's like you like the riskiness of it? And like, so my husband is actually a little conservative. I'm the one that's like, oh babe, like there's a beach, there's no one on the right leg. And it's interesting because growing up, I never perceived that as being the right, quote unquote, dynamic. I always thought it's the guy that's adventurous, right? And then the woman's like, well, I'm not sure. And then I met my husband, and he kind of not laughed in a bad way, but he was like, wow, you're really freaking kinky. And I'm just like, yeah, and you're not. Like, and it was surprising to me that my husband, again, just being from a very traditional background, I was brought up to think a certain way. And so I actually thought, oh my God, is it normal that I'm the one in the relationship that wants the kinkiness?
Yeah, no, it is totally normal. And it's those exciting things too. So that is, like, why do people ride roller coasters, right? It's terrifying. Your brain's getting all jostled around, like you feel like you're gonna die. And yet, here's this cue, like, you know, you're waiting for like 2 hours just to get on and experience that, like, you know, 2 minutes of just terror, right? It's the same thing. Like, it's exciting, like it's something new. And in relationships, especially relationships that go for a longer period of time, spicing things up, changing things up, finding ways to make things exciting, that's actually healthy. It's a healthy thing to do. And a lot of women. There's a lot of women who also get called kinky and things like they're not supposed to be that way, but it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter what your gender is. Whatever you like and you're into and is happening consensually, that's normal.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I feel good about myself now. Yeah. And then I'd be remiss to not talk about the whiskey vagina, I think you call it. I thought it was so fun, if you don't mind talking to me about that. Because I want actually guys to hear this, because I'd heard it very much about guys, that when they drink, it's more common they're going to have erectile dysfunction.
Yes.
But the whiskey vagina, talk to me about that, girl.
No, totally, right? Because the term is like whiskey dick, that they'll say. Like, you drink too much and now you cannot get an erection, or you can't orgasm. It's difficult to orgasm. The same thing can happen to women. And this is where it gets problematic, because A lot of times women go to their doctor, they say like, oh, I'm having pain with sex, I'm not enjoying sex, like there's problems. Their doctor's like, get some lube, have some wine. Have a few glasses of wine and you'll be fine. But actually, when you're intoxicated, it can be more difficult to self-lubricate, more difficult to become aroused. Like you're using a substance that is affecting your nervous system. It is depressing your nervous system. So everybody knows like your reaction time is down, right? This is why we don't drink and drive. If you are drinking and driving, please do not do that actually. But this is why, we say those things is because your reaction time's down. You have depressed the nervous system. Well, what's the clitoris? A bundle of about 10,000 nerves. So how is that going to respond to stimuli when you've used a drug that now is basically like numbing things out? And so we can have issues with arousal tissue becoming engorged. We can have the lubrication issue, but it can be incredibly frustrating because you're like, I cannot orgasm. It's been like 40 minutes and I'm getting raw. Like what is happening? Even in a solo session, it can be incredibly difficult to orgasm because you're intoxicated.
Okay, and so I assume multiple orgasms can be even harder to have.
Oh, yeah.
And so talk to me about actually multiple orgasms and squirting, because I'm just going to assume, can I lose faith in myself? But it's very interesting to go, ooh, how can I figure out how to squirt?
Yeah.
Like I was the person that started with, I can't orgasm. It's just not me.
Yeah.
I'm one of those unfortunate people that
Totally.
can't, right? That's where I started from. Then I met my husband, my life changed, multiple orgasms out of, whatever. And then the squirting part is like, okay, is this a type of person that can do it? Is it something that you can train, just like going to the gym? And then is it benefits to squirting?
Yeah, there's no known benefits to squirting, so I'll just say that.
What a shame.
Some people, I know, right? But we haven't studied it much because even, the jury's out of like, is it just urine or is it like, what is it? There seems to be there's some urea in the fluids, but it also has a sweet taste to it. So it appears to be coming from the Skene's gland. So that's all to say, you're not just peeing. So people will be like, oh, you're just peeing. No. It's not just peeing because they've actually done imaging, finding that the bladder, someone empties their bladder, they have sex, they squirt, but then they're like, oh, but then there was fluid in the bladder when we imaged again. So it's all very confusing. And really, so many people like to pathologize it or just make it like, oh, that's just a porn thing, which in porn, they will pee and they will like push and bear down to make that urine squirt. Do not recommend. You're going to destroy your pelvic floor and end up with urinary incontinence at some point in your life, but definitely as you age if you keep up that practice. So not a good idea. So in theory, everyone should be able to squirt, but it's not something that like anything's wrong with you if you don't squirt. It sometimes takes certain positions. Sometimes there's toy stimulation happening. Sometimes women only experience it while they're pregnant, where there's all this pressure, all of this circulation down there. Sometimes women only experience it with anal sex. So it really just depends.
Wow, with anal sex, because it's pressing down?
That's the thing that I'm like, anatomy-wise, like where you are, like why does it work? Why does it work that way? And it could be that there's clitoral stimulation, that there's penetration in the anus, and then from that stimulation, the Skene's glands, they shoot off, so to speak. So
I've always thought also about squirting from women who are more promiscuous. Is that true?
No. And that's something that like I feel like there's always some myth going around about being more promiscuous with women. Whether it's like you're going to have a loose vagina, you'll ruin yourself for marriage, you're going to get more infections, and you can be at higher risk for STIs, and you definitely, more partners you have. Same is true for men though. Same is true for men.
Speaking of actually being loose, I know that's one thing that a lot of women, I haven't had children, so I don't really know. But I've heard that that's one thing that women are paranoid about.
Yeah.
And so my question is, just out of curiosity, is it paranoia because they don't like the feeling or because they're worried they can't please their partner?
It's the latter in most cases. Women are told all the time that like loose vagina is like the worst thing ever. Yeah, the vagina doesn't really work that way. It's essentially an accordion of tissue. Like it expands. It passes a whole human and you will have more tissue because it expanded. There's a lot of people who report better sex, both partners, better sex after vaginal delivery. Part of that may be because you got so comfortable with your body. Part of that may be because there is more tissue there. Another part is because things actually spread. The clitoris is more exposed now. There was a lot more sensation. There was a lot more hormones flowing in the body. So there can be changes that are beneficial from that. But I think what's really problematic is that I see all the time men on the internet being like, oh, you want it tight. A tight vagina is the best. And I always laugh because I'm like, you really have no idea what you're talking about. Like, this is another, like, tell me you don't know the female body without telling me, because a tight vagina is not a ready vagina. It is the equivalent of a flaccid penis. Like, this is not somebody who is interested in anything that you have going on right now, because things are being locked down. I think about, like, you know, the movie Alien, and Sigourney Weaver's like running through like these like portholes, right? And is like closing in. Like, that is the vulva being like, oh my God, alien. Like, this is like, we do not want anyone foreign in here right now. And so that can actually be a sign then someone is not ready, someone is afraid, and it sometimes can be a case of vaginismus. And so we don't want a tight vagina. When you become aroused, the vagina actually tense. So the tissue expands, the cervix will actually move back, and it's all making, it's like, maybe there will be penetration, we don't know, but we're ready, we're gonna be ready either way. That is arousal. That is somebody who is into you, that is like, you've put in the work, like things are ready to go. If things are tight, that's not it. And that's, I would say, you know, on the same vein of talking about childbirth, the husband stitch. I talk about this in the book. I think it is a very gross practice in medicine. There's still a lot of abuse of the female body, especially in obstetric violence, when it comes to what physicians do. And the husband stitch, especially because it's often being done without consent, is where they put an extra stitch. So if you tear, or if they cut you, which really has no evidence, they shouldn't be doing that. But if you tear, because that does happen, and they stitch you up, sometimes they're like, oh, put an extra stitch at the top for your husband because it'll make sex better. And ultimately what it actually does is it causes pain with sex, and nobody has sex. Now there's actually no sex. So tell me how you, like, modifying and manipulating her vagina with a man only in mind, not her body in mind, doing it for her husband, has actually helped anyone. It hasn't. Now he's not having sex. She hates sex. Like, it's very problematic.
I know people getting like almost like plastic surgery on this. Like, oh God.
Yeah. This is the thing that I find really concerning, is that clitoral anatomy isn't really taught in medical schools, and it's not, like, we just are figuring it all out. And yet you have surgeons out there with a knife cutting up this area so that it looks good without any real thought to how does it feel, how does it function. And that is very problematic, I think, in what medicine will do to women's bodies sometimes. Is it's more about the aesthetics. Is it aesthetically pleasing? Rather than thinking about the function. Because your vulva wasn't made to be stared at. Like, your body isn't made to be looked at. Your body has all of these amazing functions that it performs, and yet everything always comes back to, like, how does your body look? How does your body look? I mean, this is something after I had my second child, and I had, like, you know, I was 40, so very different collagen, very different everything going on. But I had a much larger postpartum belly afterwards. And I took photos and I just shared it online. And I'm like, your body isn't made to be looked at. It's not. Your body, like, look what my body accomplished. And then when you think about sex as well, are you having pleasurable sex? Are you enjoying it? Then who cares what it looks like down there if you're enjoying it? And that is where I think we're doing a really big disservice. The funny thing is, so here's where I ended up on some seedy websites and stuff. So I actually, like, made a trip to Pornhub, because when you look at why physicians say labiaplasty is happening, so that's actually taking away of the tissue of the labia, what people call the lips, mostly to get rid of the inner labia, so that it's tucked in all nice and neat.
God.
I know, right? I like can't help but like Kegel every time I talk about it. Like, my little vulva's like, oh no, like it's terrifying to think about. And there are some women, they do get it done because they are struggling with body image, or they are having discomfort because there is such hypertrophy. So I don't want to shame or dismiss anybody who's getting it done for those reasons, and it has improved their life. But what's problematic is that women are being told, like, oh, like, your vagina doesn't look, your vulva doesn't look right. So we're talking about the outer tissue. Your vulva doesn't look right, therefore you need to have this surgery. Doctors are looking to porn and saying, this is because of porn. We blame porn for this. So I was like, well, I want to know. What do we have, like, trimmed up labia going on in porn? No, we do not. I had saw so much variety of vulvas, and I found on Pornhub they like voted like, you know, top vulvas. They didn't use the anatomically correct terms, but we're doing that here. And with that, there was the top voted was what people call the outie vagina, which is where the labia minora is actually on the outside. And they voted, everything was like so much variety. And I went and I got my Netter's anatomy textbook and I opened it up and I was like, it's us. We're the problem. Here is a pink, uniform and color vulva that is only an innie, and this is all we're showing in medicine. You go to Medscape, you go to like these websites, these physician, you know, based websites, and it is the white archetype of like uniform in color and everything neat and tucked away and uniform and symmetrical. And I'm like, it's us. It's not porn. Porn is like, give me all the variety, which is also to say that if you're a woman and you're concerned, like my male partner, you know, is going to look at it and think, it turns out they're really into it. They're really into the variety down there. That is what, you know, per the porn surveys that men are craving. So that to me was like such a light bulb moment of like, medicine is the one that only shows like this uniform, perfect vulva. Like that is who is showing all of that. And when you look at pornography, it is real bodies. Like, and yes, there is augmentation, there is labiaplasty, there are breast implants, like all of that happens. But then there is also like all of these very real bodies where men are actually like, I want to see a postpartum body. Like I want to see like these different changes, which is what does outside of that sphere, we are told something completely different, right? Like it's like there's this like there's the truth that lies underneath the aesthetic of it all.
What's interesting though, as you were talking, I was like, but actually I think they do a disservice to guys because at least in the porn that I've seen, it's always like they're always huge. And it's like I've heard you even talk about the Goldilocks penis or whatever.
Right?
And I was like, it's funny because porn may help women if you just watch it and go, look, ladies, like there's all types. Like men like all this. But with the guys, I've never seen a guy that's like got a small penis.
Yeah.
It's always a gigantic
I know.
horse.
Now I'm like, I have to go research that.
But isn't it true?
Yeah, I mean, it is like you think about like the movie Boogie Nights, like the whole reason they wanted Mark Wahlberg, not because he's just Mark Wahlberg and he's beautiful, but because like, you know, he had a long Johnson, like there was all this talk around that. It's so funny though, when you talk to women are terrified of large penises. And my friend who's a urologist, we were in a conversation and I was talking about how like, whenever people ask me if size matters, I'm like, it does. Because if it's too big, it's scary, or like you have to make accommodations, and like it's not the, you know, people are like, oh, if they have a micro penis, it will be you know, horrible and all of these things, and it's like, but you don't even orgasm from penile penetration. Like clitoris is the way. So there's lots of people who are in partnerships with someone who has a quote micro penis. And
for people at home that may not know, it's like what, 3 inches?
Yes. So it's you know, not what you would see on the porn scale, right? Where those are like 8 inches plus. As we're talking about this, I'm like, wow, like I need to do more research. But lots of people have very pleasurable sex with penises that size because the way to orgasm is clitoral stimulation. So penis is not even required. Some people love penis, some people don't. Like, and that's really about personal preference. But when I was talking to my friend who's a urologist, he's like, I hear that all the time. He's like, any man who has a long penis or a wide penis, that is their biggest problem, is they're like, I cannot find a sexual partner because I don't want to hurt them. Like there's a struggle with that. So you're right, there is what we see in porn, and that can be a big disservice to men. But really that's like, it's so ironic, right? Because it's like we've got female bodies and we've got variation. Why is it that men want to see large penises? Like, is this a power thing? Is this and it's just so interesting to think about that and how that's glorified. And that might be another reason why women aren't watching the heterosexual porn, is because big penises can be really scary. Yeah. I was just in conversation with 2 women yesterday, and they were like, oh yeah, like I had to get out of relationships because his penis was too big. And I was like, I didn't know what to do with this. And it was scary and it was hurting and I was just having problems. And in the book, I talk about the O-nut, which is an accommodation. So you can actually slide that on, and it's just basically like little spacer rings so that you have a buffer there. And then he's still getting stimulated, still getting pleasure, but you're controlling the depth of penetration. I'm like, how did somebody not invent this like decades ago? Like this is such a needed device, because it's a real bummer to have compatibility with somebody in all the ways, and then sexually it's incredibly frustrating and you can't have pleasurable sex together. And I know there's people who are like, that's so superficial and that shouldn't matter. It does matter. It is a part of the relationship that does matter, that can be part of the, you know, the shame spiral that you can get into.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that, because that's what I was going to add, is that like then like we're already dealing with the things that we've spoken about so much today, right? Is how much shame and guilt that we have over things because we've been told a certain way, which actually isn't true.
Yeah.
And like, again, I'm always trying to see it from the other side. I'm like, I actually get the problem with the guys, because they're seeing porn where they're seeing, oh my God, look at this guy. He's like, you know, 10 inches or whatever. He's making women squirt left, right, and center. Yeah. That's what a quote unquote man must be. And so now if I've got whatever size, I'm now either less than or I'm comparing. And then thinking about the people, the guys that have the micro penis, like that really fucking sucks for them, because women have been shown in porn that actually what makes a man, again, I'm doing quote unquote for anyone just listening, is the bigger the better. And I'm now thinking about how that does the men a disservice, and then they feel the shame, and then what they bring into the bedroom, right, with the confidence part of it, I'm sure then just changes everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about just how much people are shamed about their bodies in general, and then you take it to the genitals, and it's a whole next level, right? I mean, it is, I think when it comes to genital shame, it is just as bad for men as it is for women. I think there's a lot more euphemisms and jokes that have been thrown around about female anatomy, and men have been able to dominate spaces where they throw that around. And so that has been something I think has gotten more attention. But I mean, it is completely socially acceptable to shame somebody for having a small penis when you look at what happens in media, when you look at what happens just in conversations online, is that socially it's okay to have a laugh about that, and it really shouldn't be.
Yeah. The last thing is, where is our G-spot?
Oh, highly debated. Does it even exist? Yeah. So it used to be thought that like on the anterior wall, so belly button side, about like, you know, about the two knuckles in, maybe a little bit further, there's a G-spot. This is now very highly debated, because now that we understand the clitoris isn't just this little button, but it's like this wishbone structure that comes down, the question is now, is it actually the clitoris? Like, is it actually the internal clitoris that has been being stimulated? And so this is something that like you will see, I mean, people fight about this. Like they get big mad about like, no, of course there is a G-spot. No, there's no way there's a G-spot. Like that's just misinformation. And like, and what, people trying to help you have better sex? Is that like horrible? What it comes down to is that I'm like, if you find that's pleasurable, who cares what spot it is? Like, who cares what spot it is if you find it pleasurable? There's some people who like their cervix stimulated. They find that incredibly pleasurable. There's people having nipple-gasms. There's people thinking off. Like, whatever it is, if you can check the box that that was pleasurable for me, it's normal. And who cares what we call it or what we name it? Like, you don't have to have, like, I feel like that is part of like, you know, what magazines and everything do, is they've got a name like, you know, the next best orgasm, like the coregasm, you can get off by working out. And I'm like, it's a very spontaneous thing. Nobody's intending to, they're just like doing a core exercise and then they're like, something just happened. Or the pee-gasm, which is where you have to pee so bad. Usually this happens like in the middle of the night. You wake up and you're like, I'm having an orgasm. That's because like there's just so much stimulation happening there. I don't advise that. Don't try for a pee-gasm. Holding your bladder that long, you're gonna end up with a UTI. That's bad news. Just work on what feels good for you. What's pleasurable for you, and if you're in a partnership, the boxes you check is that it was consensual and we both enjoyed ourselves. And then we do not worry about what we're calling the, you know, what we're labeling things, whether it's kink, whether it's not kink, what your doctor would say about it, what your mom would say about it. Like, we just don't care. Just don't care.
It's normal.
It's normal.
Oh, yeah. Girl, where can people find you, everything you're doing, and your amazing book, Is This Normal? Click here right now to learn how to actually fix bad sex. 95% of men orgasm when they have sex, and usually it can take them 5 minutes. With women, it's 65% of women only have orgasms, and it usually takes us around 18 minutes.